Chapter 1, August. In the heat of summer, a torrential downpour raged late at night. Celia Carter had just endured her boyfriend's betrayal, a dead phone, and a stolen wallet, only to run into her other ex-boyfriend, Ethan Blackwood, at a bus stop. And in the end, she somehow dazedly ended up in his car. Sitting soaked in the passenger seat, she was startled when Ethan suddenly leaned over her. "Seatbelt." The buckle clicked into place, and Ethan pulled away. "Why didn't Quentin Pierce come to pick you up?" His cool, detached voice was tinged with weariness and distance. Celia closed her eyes, exhausted. "He's busy," she said dismissively. Quentin was the cheating boyfriend she'd been set up with, and he was also her father's attending physician. And Ethan Blackwood. On the second day her father was hospitalized, he had been transferred to First Hospital, becoming Quentin's direct superior. It all felt like a dream. The man she had longed for 7 years had appeared so suddenly before her, a witness to her utter disarray. The air conditioning in the car was on full blast. Soaked to the bone, Celia couldn't help but shiver. Ethan glanced at her and turned up the temperature. Silence stretched between them. Celia hesitated before speaking. "My dad's tumor, is there any chance he'll get better? Your father is not my patient." Ethan's reply was swift and cold enough to cut. Celia froze, a sting in her nose. That afternoon, she had received intimate photos of Quentin with another woman. Even when she had angrily broken up with him, she hadn't felt as humiliated as she did now. They didn't speak again. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of a dilapidated old apartment building. Celia's heart was a tangled mess. She never imagined that after 7 years, after so much had changed, even the concrete road outside the complex had been repaved twice, Ethan would still remember exactly where she lived. She peeked at him from the side, testing the waters. "Dr. Blackwood, thank you for tonight." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes so sharp it felt like he could see right through her. Without a word, he pressed the button to unlock the doors. The click echoed in the car, a clear signal for her to leave. It felt like a slap across her face. He had only driven her home out of basic decency. How ridiculous of her to hope that he still had a place for her in his heart. Celia couldn't stay a second longer. As she pushed the door open to get out, a woman's cloying voice drifted from outside. "Quentin, slow down, I'm too tired to keep up." She looked up and saw Quentin with his arm around a slender woman walking out of the apartment building. Their conversation carried clearly on the night air. "Are you sure Celia isn't home? Aren't you afraid she'll find out and throw a fit if you bring me to her place? Tell me, who's better, me or Celia Carter?" "You, of course. I've been with that woman for 3 months, and she won't even let me touch her hand, so what if she finds out? She's counting on me to treat her father. She doesn't have the guts to make a scene." They continued talking as they got into a Lamborghini parked by the curb. Celia trembled with rage. Even though they had broken up, their words still sickened her. Ethan, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly spoke. "Aren't you going to go out there and confront them?" Celia looked up abruptly. Their eyes met. Her own, shimmering with unshed tears, could have captivated any man. "Can you take me away from here?" Ethan stared at her for 3 long seconds, then lowered his voice. "In what capacity are you asking me to take you away?" Chapter 2, Celia stared blankly at Ethan, a storm of chaotic emotions swirling in her mind, desperate for an escape. Finally, she closed her eyes, grabbed the front of his shirt, and pressed her lips against his. The enclosed space of the car was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, the only sound their breathing. After a long moment, Celia slowly pulled away and opened her eyes. "Is that enough for you to take me away?" Ethan didn't speak, and her heart sank with each passing second. Celia lowered her head, feeling she must have truly lost her mind. Just as she was about to leave, he grabbed her wrist. "Did I say you could go?" Half an hour later, the car pulled up to a hotel. 3 minutes later, they entered a room, one after the other. The lock clicked shut, and in the enclosed space, the temperature seemed to rise. Celia felt a pang of anxiety. Ethan walked toward her. For every step he took, she took one back, until her back was pressed against the wall. "What are you hiding from?" He leaned in close, his voice drifting down from above her. "Weren't you quite brave just a moment ago?" Instantly, a deep blush spread across Celia's face, creeping up to her ears and neck. Her earlier boldness had been a moment of madness. Now that she was thinking clearly, she naturally retreated. I'm going to take a shower first." She threw out the sentence and bolted for the bathroom, her step so frantic it was as if she feared he would catch her. Half an hour later, after her shower, Celia emerged wrapped in a bath towel to a silent room. Ethan had fallen fast asleep on the sofa. Celia walked over and studied him. 7 years had erased the last traces of boyishness from his face, leaving him impossibly handsome and composed, with a magnetic pull. As if possessed, she slowly leaned closer, so close she could feel his breath. In his sleep, Ethan shifted his hands slightly. The movement snapped Celia back to her senses, and she quickly pulled away. She stared at his long, elegant fingers for a moment before covering him with a light blanket. Then, she went to bed herself. That night, Celia's sleep was restless. The next morning, she was woken by her ringing phone. Looking around the empty room, a wave of disappointment washed over her. She was always getting ahead of herself. 7 years ago, she had given herself completely to Ethan, only for him to break up with her the very next day and leave the country without a word. What appeal could she possibly hold for him now? The phone rang again. She answered it, and a voice on the other end said, "Miss Carter, your father's condition has worsened. He's been rushed to the emergency room. You need to get to the hospital now." Celia's heart seized. Forgetting everything else, she rushed to the hospital. Half an hour later, at the entrance of First Hospital, Celia scrambled out of the taxi, not even noticing the pain as she banged her neck on the car door. Her only thought was to get to the ER. The red light above the emergency room doors was still on. She stood in the silent hallway, her hands trembling. She and her father had relied on each other since she was 8 years old. He had always been a towering mountain in her eyes, but now, that mountain was about to crumble. She wished with all her heart that she could be the one lying on that operating table instead. Celia took slow, deep breaths, trying to quell the overwhelming emotions. She had to pull herself together to take care of her father. Just then, Quentin rushed up from behind her and, without a word, dragged her into the nearby fire escape stairwell. "Let go of me, don't you touch me." Quentin grabbed her chin, forcing her head to the side. His eyes, sharp as knives, scanned the side of her neck. There, a distinct red mark was visible. "You didn't come home last night. Where were you fooling around? What business is it of yours?" Celia's mind was on her father, and she had no patience for this. "We're broken up. You're the one who cheated, so don't you dare try to pin this on me. Did I agree to break up?" For a moment, Quentin's handsome face twisted into a snarl. "Who was the man? You couldn't wait to break up with me just to be with him. You couldn't even wait one night." Celia's face flushed with anger. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. Clearly enraged, Quentin slammed her against the wall, grabbed her collar, and kissed her fiercely. Celia struggled, turning her head away. Just as she was about to scream for help, the fire escape door was pushed open by a hand with long, elegant fingers. Chapter 3, Ethan had just come from the ER, still dressed in blue surgical scrubs. "This is a hospital, not your backyard." Quentin's expression soured, but Ethan was his boss. He had no choice but to concede. "I know." He turned back to Celia, gently stroking her messy hair while lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "We'll talk about this later." Celia slapped his hand away and took a step back. "I have nothing to say to you." Quentin's face darkened, and he looked ready to explode. Just then, Ethan spoke up. "Dr. Pierce, Dean Miller is looking for you." Quentin was currently trying to get promoted to attending physician. Hearing this, he couldn't be bothered with Celia any longer and hurried away. Once he was gone, Celia finally relaxed, leaning against the wall for support. Now, only she and Ethan remained in the stairwell. Ethan stripped off his surgical scrubs, revealing the pristine white coat underneath. He glanced at Celia, and though his face was coolly detached, his deep eyes smoldered with an aggressive intensity. Memories of the previous night flooded back, and Celia guiltily averted her gaze. She bit her lip, trying to break the strange atmosphere. "Thank you for last night," she said stiffly. "Thank me for what?" Ethan walked toward the corner where she stood, stopping a step away. "For taking you in, or," he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur, "or for not touching you." Celia's breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment she was speechless. Ethan remained perfectly composed. He pulled off his latex gloves, tossed them into a trash can, and said, "Your father's surgery is over." At his words, Celia immediately ran toward the ER. Her father was just being wheeled out, tubes draining fluids from his body. Celia's eyes reddened. She grabbed a nearby doctor's arm. "How is my father?" the doctor sighed. "Thanks to Director Blackwood performing the surgery, we were able to save him. But your father's condition is not optimistic." A chill washed over Celia. Her legs felt weak and she nearly collapsed. Seeing her distress, the doctor added, "But there have been successful cases like your father's in the field." Celia looked at him with desperate hope. Director Blackwood's mentor, Professor Shaw, is known as the saint's hand of brain tumor treatment. He retired 2 years ago, but if you could persuade him to operate, there might still be a chance. Celia sat numbly in room 308 for hours, her mind racing, trying to figure out how she could possibly ask Ethan for such a favor. She still hadn't found the words by the time her father slowly opened his eyes. In just 2 weeks, it was as if death had fast-forwarded the aging process, draining the life from him. He looked frail and ancient. Celia moistened his lips with a cotton swab, forcing a smile onto her face. "Dad, the doctor said you'll slowly get better after the surgery. You might even be well enough to go home next month." "Cease, I'm sorry. I've made you worry?" Her father's voice was faint, but each word struck Celia like a hammer blow. She clenched her fists, fighting back the burning tears. "Don't be silly. It's just a minor illness. What's there to worry about?" But Walter Carter just gave a weak, bitter smile and reached out his withered hand to hold hers. "You don't have to comfort me. I know my own body. I just hope that before I die I can see you married. See someone there to love and protect you for me. If that happens, I can go without any regrets." A sharp pain pierced Celia's heart, leaving her speechless. Her father didn't know she and Quentin had broken up. But how could she tell him now, when he was so close to death? It would only cause him more anxiety, making him worry about her future for the rest of his days. Celia lowered her head to hide her tears, then looked up and forced herself to lie. "Don't worry, Dad. Quentin's family is well off and he treats me very well. When I marry into the Pierce family, I'll be living a comfortable life. I'll be fine." Just as the words left her mouth, there was a sound at the door. Celia turned her head and met Ethan's cold, scrutinizing gaze. Chapter 4, Celia couldn't meet Ethan's eyes. She guiltily lowered her head, a heavy weight settling in her chest. A few minutes later, after finishing his examination, Ethan left the room without a word. "Dr. Blackwood, wait." Celia followed him into the hallway. The other doctor's words echoed in her mind. Only Professor Shaw could possibly save her father. She wanted to beg Ethan for help, but she didn't know how to begin. Why should he help her? She stammered for a moment, unable to form the words, but Ethan misinterpreted her intention. "You're the same as you were 7 years ago, a compulsive liar." He looked down at her, his tone glacial. "To be able to lie so shamelessly to your own father on his sickbed, it's truly an eye-opener." He turned and walked away. Celia's face went pale. She knew lying was wrong, but she didn't understand why Ethan would call her a compulsive liar. From the day they met to the day they fell in love, she had never once deceived him. Besides, 7 years ago, he was the one who had wronged her. What right did he have to say such things to her now? Celia felt her strength drain away. Leaning against the wall, she slowly made her way back to the room. Just as she was about to push the door open, someone grabbed her arm. She turned to see Quentin. "Celia, we need to talk." Without waiting for her to protest, Quentin pulled her into an empty lounge next to the hospital room. They were alone. Celia worried he might try something again, and this time, Ethan might not be there to save her. She pulled out her phone and displayed the explicit photos she had received. "You, with another woman. The pictures were sent straight to my phone. If you keep harassing me, I won't hesitate to send these out. Quentin, I know you're up for a promotion. If you don't want your career ruined, you'd better not push me." Quentin's expression immediately turned to one of panic. Celia turned to leave, but he blocked the door again. "You win," Quentin said, his face dark. "We can break up. But first, you'll accompany me to dinner at Dean Miller's house tomorrow. After my review for the department head position is over, I'll break up with you." Quentin had been working hard to curry favor with his future father-in-law. News of him cheating now would have a huge impact on his career. "Why should I cooperate with you?" "Because your father is still a patient in this hospital," Quentin threatened. "Right now, he's hoping to see you get married. If I tell him I'm leaving you, what do you think will happen to him?" Thinking of her father in his hospital bed, Celia had no choice but to agree. The next day, Celia went with Quentin to Dean Miller's house. Celia knocked. The door swung open, but when she saw the person standing there, her heart skipped a beat. What was Ethan doing here? Ethan's gaze swept over their matching outfits, his eyes unreadable. Celia couldn't look at him. She subconsciously smoothed down her dress, which Quentin had forced her to wear. It now felt incredibly awkward. Inside, Celia greeted the dean's wife. "Professor Davis, it's been a long time." Dean Miller's wife, Laura Davis, had been her university professor and had always looked out for her. Dean Miller pulled Quentin away to get some wine from the cellar. Eager to impress the dean, Quentin readily went along. Celia stayed in the living room, helping Professor Davis arrange flowers. "Celia, have a seat. I just need to get my reading glasses," Professor Davis said. After she left, only Celia and Ethan remained in the living room. Celia felt his presence was overwhelmingly strong. She looked up and her eyes met his. His direct gaze unnerved her, and she forced herself to focus on the bouquet of lilies on the coffee table. Celia picked up a pair of scissors, about to trim a stem. Suddenly, Ethan reached out, took the flower from her hand, and snapped the stem with a sharp crack. Celia, who was still holding the petals, flinched. "Couldn't you be more gentle?" she chided instinctively. The moment the words were out, Ethan abruptly pulled her toward him. His arm wrapped around her waist, and it was as if his cool, detached mask fell away, revealing a predatory and aggressive man beneath. He kissed her fiercely. The next second, a loud crash echoed from behind them as a wine bottle shattered on the floor. Celia quickly broke free from Ethan's embrace and looked over in a panic. Dean Miller's wife was standing at the top of the stairs, staring at them in utter shock. Chapter 5. For a moment, Celia's mind went completely blank. The way Laura Davis was looking at her made her want the ground to swallow her whole. Just then, Quentin and Dean Miller returned with the wine. Quentin saw the shattered glass at Laura's feet. "Professor Davis, are you hurt?" He placed the wine on the table, then turned to Celia. "Why do you look so pale? Did the noise scare you?" Celia lowered her gaze and shook her head, forcing herself to appear calm. She instinctively glanced at Ethan. He was completely unruffled, still adjusting the flowers in the vase. Well, since the wine is here, let's eat. Celia, come help me with the dishes." Professor Davis took Celia's arm and led her into the kitchen. "Celia, you're still young. Don't ever let yourself get caught in a compromising situation. In the end, you'll be the one who gets hurt. Do you understand?" Faced with her professor's concern, Celia could only nod. Agreeing to pretend to be a loving couple with Quentin had been a terrible idea. At the dinner table, Quentin continued his act as the attentive boyfriend. "Celia, try some of these poached shrimp." "She's allergic to shrimp," Ethan said casually. The atmosphere at the table suddenly grew tense. Celia felt this charade was becoming harder and harder to maintain. "Ethan, you're so observant. I just mentioned that in passing, and you remembered," Laura Davis said with a laugh, trying to smooth things over. She then turned to Quentin. "Quentin, I know you're busy with work, but you need to pay more attention to your girlfriend." Quentin nodded, then looked at Ethan. "Thank you, Director Blackwood, for being so concerned about my Celia." Hearing this, Ethan glanced over nonchalantly. "Yours, what, are you two getting married soon?" No, Celia's denial was instinctive. The moment she said it, her heart leaped into her throat. Quentin's expression changed. He took Celia's hand and smiled at the others. "Right now, we're only focused on Mr. Carter's health. Everything else will have to wait." Ethan's gaze dropped to their clasped hands, his expression dark and unreadable. Only Dean Miller seemed oblivious to the underlying tension. "Just the other day, Ethan was discussing Mr. Carter's case with me." Celia looked at Ethan in surprise. Their eyes met, and his dark obsidian gaze seemed to have a powerful pull that made her quickly look away. She tensed, listening intently. Dean Miller's face grew serious as he spoke of the patient. "Mr. Carter's condition is indeed not optimistic. If we could get Professor Shaw to operate, the risk would be cut in half." "Ethan, Professor Shaw is your mentor. As a favor to a colleague, please do what you can." "Helping a patient is my duty as a doctor," Ethan replied, his voice cool. Celia couldn't tell if he would help her or not. After dinner, Ethan took a call and left early. Celia stayed with Quentin, not leaving until 9 o'clock. She refused Quentin's offer to drive her home. As she walked toward the bus stop, she caught sight of a familiar Maybach in her peripheral vision. Wasn't that Ethan's car? After a moment's hesitation, she mustered her courage. walked over to the Maybach and knocked on the window. She had to talk to him about her father's condition. Getting Professor Shaw to operate would be difficult, but as long as there was a sliver of hope, she had to try. The window rolled down, revealing Ethan's stern face and his intensely predatory gaze. Celia bit her lip, fighting back her embarrassment. "Dr. Blackwood, could you give me a ride?" At her words, the fire in his eyes seemed to intensify, but his voice was slow and deliberate. "I'm going back to my hotel. Are you sure you want to come with me?" Chapter 6, Celia didn't refuse. They arrived at the hotel, the same room as last time. The door locked behind them and a fiery kiss landed on her lips. Ethan's hand settled on the small of her back, pulling her in. He kissed her for what felt like an eternity. Then, Ethan swept her up into his arms and carried her to the bed. "Wait!" Celia dodged another descending kiss, her eyes downcast. "I need to talk to you about something." "Now?" Ethan's forehead rested against hers, his hot breath fanning across her skin. She looked up, her eyes pleading. "This is really important to me." Ethan placed her on the bed, his body brushing against hers. With visible effort, he reined himself in. "Go on. Can you please ask Professor Shaw to treat my father?" As the words left her mouth, the curve of Ethan's lips flattened. "Is that why you agreed to come to the hotel with me?" Celia turned her head away, unable to meet his gaze. In Ethan's eyes, her silence was an admission of guilt. His deep, narrow eyes stared at her, a storm brewing within them. He let out a cold laugh. "Did you think I was the same as I was 7 years ago? That all you had to do was act cute and I'd give you anything you wanted?" Celia's heart grew colder with each word. 7 years ago, he was the one who had wronged her. Why was it that every time he brought it up, he acted as if she were some kind of joke? Fighting back the burning tears, she sat up on the bed. But as she took a step to leave, he grabbed her wrist. "Leaving?" Celia looked up at him, tears trembling in her eyes, but his words were relentless. "You want my help. Is this how you ask for a favor?" He held her fast, pushing her back onto the bed. "This outfit is hideous. Don't ever wear it again." His voice was hoarse and dangerous. Celia's face flushed crimson, and she couldn't stop herself from retorting, "What's it to you?" Ethan answered her with his actions. He ripped the dress and threw it to the floor, his hands gripping her waist. He didn't say a word the entire time, his expression a mixture of restraint and ferocity. Only the beads of sweat that fell onto her skin betrayed his excitement and emotion. It was a long and exhausting night. The next morning, Celia woke up to an empty room. It felt like a dream. She rushed back to the hospital and saw a gurney being wheeled out of room 307, a white sheet covering the body. The family followed behind, their cries heart-wrenching. Celia froze, a chill creeping into her hands and feet. She knew the woman from room 307. She'd had the same illness as her father. She leaned against the wall, a heavy stone pressing on her chest, making each breath a painful stab. After a moment, she steeled herself and walked toward the oncology department office. As it happened, only Ethan was there. She walked over, her voice a low murmur. "Ethan?" Ethan looked up, his expression indifferent. "What is it?" Celia thought of her father in his hospital bed. She had no other choice. "Last night, I already gave you what I could. Can you please help me?" Ethan stood up and gestured for her to come closer. She approached him. His long fingers tilted her chin up, his eyes appraising her like a sacrificial lamb. "If you want to command my services, one night is hardly enough." Celia was stunned. She never thought Ethan would go back on his word. In a panic, she slapped his hand away. "You promised me just then." The wooden door of the office creaked open. Chapter 7, Quentin pushed the door open and walked in. Celia jumped, quickly letting go of Ethan's hand. The last thing she wanted was for Quentin to suspect something between her and Ethan. If he went crazy and ruined Ethan's reputation, it would be terrible. Ethan felt his hand suddenly become empty. He watched Celia's flustered reaction, a cold glint flashing in his dark eyes. Quentin sensed the strange atmosphere between them. Recalling Ethan's unusual attention towards Celia at dinner the night before, he quickly walked to her side. "What are you two talking about?" "We were talking about my dad's condition," Celia said, glancing at Ethan. Just then, Ethan answered a call from the emergency center, summoning him to the operating room. He left immediately without another word. Only Quentin and Celia remained in the office. Thinking about what he had just witnessed, Quentin immediately questioned her. "The man you were with the other night, it wasn't Ethan Blackwood, was it?" Celia's expression stiffened. She turned her head away. "Would it kill you to not spout nonsense for one day? It'd be best if it wasn't." Quentin's suspicion lingered. Director Blackwood is a top oncologist who returned from overseas. The Blackwood family is one of the most powerful in the capital. You two are not from the same world. If you really get involved with him, be careful you don't get played and thrown away. You think everyone is like you. Celia gave Quentin a cold look, bypassed him, and walked out with her back straight. "Get out of my way, I have to get to work." It wasn't until she reached an empty corner that Celia leaned against the wall, covering her tear-filled eyes with her hand. She had been played, hadn't she? Twice. After a long while, she composed herself and went to the nurse's station to start her shift. At noon, Celia brought lunch to her father, only to find Quentin there as well. "Quentin, you don't have to keep trying to comfort me. I know my own condition," Walter Carter said, followed by a cough. Celia rushed in, poured her father a glass of water, and then turned to Quentin with a warning. "What are you doing here? Don't be like that. Be nicer to Quentin," her father said, taking the water. He continued, "As long as you two are happy together, I can close my eyes in peace." "Don't worry, Mr. Carter. I'll take good care of Celia. We'll have a happy future together," Quentin said with conviction, then deliberately turned to Celia. "Right, Celia." Meeting her father's hopeful gaze, Celia could only nod. But the next second, she saw Ethan emerge expressionlessly from the en-suite bathroom. The sudden sight of Ethan nearly made her drop the water pitcher in her hands. Dr. Blackwood, what are you doing here?" Ethan didn't speak, but Quentin stood up to answer. "Director Blackwood is very concerned about your father's case. He came to check on him as soon as he got out of the ER." The atmosphere in the room grew as taut as a drawn bowstring. Celia was so nervous she barely dared to breathe. Quentin suddenly walked to her side and put his arm around her. "It's very kind of Director Blackwood to be so concerned. When Celia and I get married, you must be our guest of honor." With her father watching, Celia couldn't struggle too much. Ethan merely gave them a brief, indifferent glance. He even asked Walter Carter a few questions before leaving the room. But Celia knew he was angry. Very angry, half an hour later. After finally getting rid of Quentin, Celia went to find Ethan immediately. But as she reached his office door, she saw a slender, graceful woman hugging him intimately. Chapter 8 nurses nearby were whispering. "Wow, Director Blackwood's girlfriend is so beautiful, I heard. She's a socialite from a wealthy family in the capital. They look so perfect together. I heard she's here to discuss their engagement." In an instant, Celia felt all the strength leave her body. The couple, nestled together, did indeed look like a perfect match. Celia turned and slowly walked away. Quentin was a bastard, but he was right about one thing. She and Ethan Blackwood were not from the same world. She had been so foolish to still hold out hope for him. Celia walked back to the hospital room. Standing at the door, she forced a smile, not wanting her father to see her sadness. She was about to push the door open when she saw through the crack that her father was coughing up blood. He bent over, struggled to pick up the trash can, and hid the blood-stained tissues deep inside. Celia stood outside the door, desperately clamping a hand over her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Cough, cough, for as long as he coughed inside the room, Celia cried outside the door. Compared to her father's pain, her so-called dignity and love seemed utterly insignificant. She sank to the floor by the door, took out her phone, and started to message Ethan. In the chat box, she typed and deleted the same sentence over and over, unsure how to phrase her plea for a sliver of his mercy. In her panic, the phone slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. At that moment, she realized with bitter sorrow that even if Ethan was just playing with her, she wished the game would continue. Her hands trembling, she picked up the phone. As she was about to stand, a sharp, unfriendly female voice came from above. "Celia Carter, can we talk?" Celia looked up into a face that was both familiar and strange. It was Isabel Vance. 7 years ago, after that night, Ethan had left the country with Isabel. She should have known they would end up together. A few minutes later, they were in an empty corner of a stairwell. Isabel's expression was a mixture of arrogant pity. "Celia, I actually feel sorry for you, to think you'd fall for the same man twice. Professor Shaw is at the Blackwood family's private hospital. If Ethan really wanted to help you, he could have had the man here with a single phone call. The fact that he's dragged it out this long just proves he's enjoying watching you suffer. That's enough. Stop talking. Celia felt a profound sense of shame as she listened to Isabel's venomous words. Ethan, in that moment, she thought she could hear her own heart breaking. So, there really were people in the world who could be this cruel, who could hurt someone again and again. She fled, her hopes for Ethan completely extinguished. She would have to find another way to get her father the surgery he needed. At 6 in the evening in the cafeteria. Of all the luck, Celia ran into Ethan again. As they passed each other, she didn't spare him a single glance, treating him like a complete stranger. She sat down at a random table and mechanically chewed her food. A colleague asked curiously, "Why didn't you get any soup? I thought you liked having soup with dinner." "I'm in the mood for something different. People's tastes don't stay the same forever," Celia said, her eyes downcast, her tone flat. Behind her, Ethan, holding a bowl of soup, froze mid-step. He had to dig his fork into the meat on his plate to suppress the strange surge of emotion welling up inside him. That night, Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, finishing another cigarette. He then took out his phone to message Celia, only to find their entire chat history cleared. They were no longer friends. Just then, Isabel opened the door. Smelling the smoke, she pouted. "Ethan, last time I was at your house, your mother told you to smoke less. Did you touch my phone?" Ethan asked coldly. Isabel froze for a second, then quickly regained her composure. "Of course not." Ethan crushed the cigarette butt fiercely and turned to glare at her. "I told you, stop bothering me. That night 7 years ago, I was drunk. I thought you were Celia. For the past 7 years, I've kept my promise, played the role of your fake boyfriend, and helped your family's business. That is more than enough to make up for that night. I never wanted compensation." Isabel reached for his sleeve, but he shook her off. "I was never a good person to begin with, and I have no intention of tying myself down for a lifetime over one night," Ethan said, his voice laced with impatience and a hint of menace. "Don't test my patience. The same way I helped the Vance family is the same way I can destroy it." Isabel's heart dropped. She was terrified by his ferocity. She had pretended to be Celia back then to latch onto the Blackwood family, thinking Ethan was the perfect gentleman he appeared to be. But in reality, while Ethan was certainly capable, if you crossed his line, he was a ruthless demon. And Celia Carter was his line. Damn it, she had to find a way to make sure Celia and he were finished for good. After Isabel left, Ethan's mind was still in turmoil. He dialed Celia's number, but it went unanswered. At 1 in the morning, he drove to the hospital to find her. The car sped through the empty streets. He thought he must be going insane. Celia finished her night shift and returned to the nurse's station, only to find Ethan sitting in her chair, smoking. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, her tone distant. "If you want to smoke, please go to the smoking area." "Celia, why didn't you answer my calls?" Ethan extinguished his cigarette and walked toward her. His ink-black eyes stared at her. Celia instinctively wanted to run, but Ethan caught her first, pulling her into a non-negotiable kiss. "MMPH, you bastard." Celia pushed him away and, with a sharp slap, struck him across the face. "Ethan, is it fun toying with me? In your eyes, am I just some woman you can do whatever you want with?" Tears streamed down her face as she choked out the words, her angry voice as small as a kitten's, but it made Ethan's expression change. He instinctively tried to explain. Before he could finish, a shrill alarm blared from the nurse's station, followed by an announcement over the emergency broadcast system. "Code Blue, Room 308, Walter Carter, respiratory arrest. All relevant medical personnel, please report to Emergency Room 2 immediately." Chapter 9, Forgetting Everything Else, Celia bolted toward Emergency Room 2, with Ethan right behind her. Halfway there, the head nurse stopped Ethan. "Director Blackwood, the patient is in critical condition. We need you in the surgery." Ethan nodded and turned toward the sterilization room. The light above the ER doors stayed on for hours. Celia waited outside the entire time. In just 2 short months, she had lost count of how many times her father had been rushed to the ER. Each time, a little more of his life force was drained away. She could do nothing. She didn't even know if he would make it out safely this time, if she would ever have the chance to hear him call her Cease again. She leaned against the wall, the grief in her chest crushing her heart, making it harder and harder to breathe. Her vision started to go dark in a daze. She felt someone lift her into their arms. She thought she smelled the faint scent of cedarwood again. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on a bed in a break room. Quentin was sitting by her bedside. When he saw she was awake, he reached out to touch her forehead. "Let me see if you still have a fever." Celia pulled away, repulsed by his intimacy. "Quentin, I really don't have the energy to play these games with you." Her voice was still hoarse, and she had an air of fragile beauty. "Your father may be out of the ER, but he's still in the ICU. Right now, I'm the only one who can save him." Quentin stood up, a smug look on his face. "There's a top brain tumor surgeon at Capitol Hospital, just as skilled as Professor Shaw. He and my father are old friends. What do you want me to do?" At this point, Celia was desperate enough to try anything. "Tomorrow night, dress up and accompany me to a party at the Azure Pavilion." The next evening, Celia went to the Azure Pavilion. Quentin called at the last minute, saying he had something to take care of and would be late. He told her to go into the private room first. The moment she entered, several men inside started catcalling, telling her she had to drink to atone for Quentin's tardiness. She scanned the room and, to her dismay, saw Ethan. He looked different from how he did at the hospital, dressed in a black shirt, sitting alone on one end of the sofa, swirling a glass of red wine. He glanced at her, his eyes seemingly indifferent, but a chill ran down Celia's spine. She avoided his gaze and nodded to the others. "All right, I'll drink for Quentin. 3 glasses as a penalty." As she spoke, Ethan suddenly leaned forward and with a thud placed a bottle of whiskey on the table. "This bottle, drink it all." The room fell silent. It was a high-proof liquor. A whole bottle would be enough to nearly kill someone. Ethan was clearly trying to make things difficult for Celia, but no one at the table was willing to offend him. They all just watched the show. After all, Quentin had sent her here to trade her for their resources. It was just that this little lamb was clearly unaware of that fact. Celia had no other choice. She reached for the bottle, not even sparing Ethan a glance, and started chugging it down. The strong liquor burned her throat and chest. In an instant, a flush spread across her pale cheeks. The men in the room watched with hungry eyes, but with Ethan present, no one dared to make a move. But soon, Celia couldn't hold her liquor. It trickled down from the corner of her lips with a loud crash. Ethan suddenly stood up, snatched the bottle from her, and smashed it. Then, with a stone-cold expression, he dragged her out of the room. "Celia, do you have any idea what you're doing?" Celia's body was limp. Pinned by him, she collapsed bonelessly into his arms. "I want to go home." Celia was already delirious, her misty eyes filled with terror. "I want to go home. I want to see my dad." All of Ethan's anger suddenly vanished. He pursed his lips, lifted her into his arms, and drove her home. He used her fingerprint to unlock the door and carried her inside. Ethan had given her something to sober her up on the way, and Celia could now recognize who was in front of her. A dim yellow light shone from above. Before her was the man she loved to her very core. He was caressing her face, his eyes as gentle as they had been when they were in love. The room filled with an intoxicating intimacy. Celia watched as Ethan leaned in. Just as their lips were about to touch, a frantic pounding came from the door. "Celia, I know you're in there, open the door." The sound shocked Celia back to her senses. She immediately pushed Ethan away. "Get away from me." She was truly insane. She knew Ethan was just playing with her, yet she had almost fallen for it again. Ethan saw the disgust in her eyes, and the anger he had suppressed earlier flared up. She was so dismissive of him, yet she cared so much about Quentin's reaction. Was she that desperate to marry him? Jealousy was a potent poison. Ethan dragged her back, hoisting her up against the door. The cold wall made Celia tremble. "Ethan, you're insane." The person outside seemed to guess what was happening, and the pounding grew more urgent. "Celia Carter, open this damn door." Ethan let out a cold laugh. His fingers slid under her dress as he commanded, "Cry out." Chapter 10. Under his assault, her body, numbed by alcohol, was completely beyond her control. Ethan got what he wanted. The 2 men, one inside and one out, treated her like a trophy, trampling her dignity without a second thought. After what felt like an eternity, it was finally over. "Get out!" Celia slapped Ethan hard, then scrambled into the bathroom in utter humiliation. Under the warm yellow light, Ethan's gaze fell upon her. Her dress was half undone, revealing angry red marks below her collarbone. He finally realized how far he had gone. Ethan leaned against the wall, covering his eyes with his hand. For the first time in his life, the ever-composed man had no idea how to face her. Celia had thought that night was the worst nightmare of her life, but when she arrived at the hospital the next day, she learned that nightmares could continue. Room 308. Celia stood frozen in the doorway. The man who had been fine just yesterday was now lying motionless in the hospital bed. Her eyes wide, she walked toward him. She wanted to cry, but the grief was so intense that no tears would come. She knelt by the bedside and whispered in a gentle, almost coaxing tone, "Dad, please don't scare me, okay?" Her lips trembled as she knelt, her shaky hand reaching out to touch her father's. That old, rough hand, marked by the years, no longer held the familiar warmth she knew. It was cold, stiff. How could this happen? She looked at the doctor, pleading. "Didn't you say he had 2 more months? Didn't he make it through the surgery the other day?" "Celia, your father, he took his own life," the doctor said, pointing to a letter on the table. With trembling hands, Celia picked up the letter. It was a single sentence written on a piece of white medical paper, torn from who knows where. "Cease, I've gone to find your mother. You will always be Daddy's good girl. I'm sorry. You have to take care of yourself from now on and live a good life." The tears could no longer be held back, falling in large drops onto the paper. "Dad, if even you don't want me anymore, how can I be okay?" Just then, a harsh voice shattered the silence in the room. "Who told you to be so shameless? All I did was tell your father you were messing around with Ethan Blackwood last night, and he got so angry he killed himself." Celia whipped her head around to look at Quentin, hatred momentarily overwhelming her grief. Quentin continued, oblivious. "Miss Vance was even generous enough to say she'd find a doctor for your dad if you stopped bothering her fiancé. Your dad was too proud to accept. Turns out he was just too ashamed of his disgraceful daughter to keep living." "Quentin, I'll kill you," fueled by a strength she didn't know she possessed. Celia lunged at him, grabbing his throat, her eyes red and wild. Quentin was taken aback, clearly not expecting such a crazed reaction. But he was a man, much stronger than her. With a forceful shove, he sent her sprawling to the floor. Ethan, having heard the news, rushed in just in time to see this. He had never seen Celia in such a frantic state. He went to help her up. With tears streaming down her face, Celia pushed him away, her eyes filled with loathing. "Get away, you're no better than he is." The following week, Celia took leave to handle the funeral arrangements. She felt like a walking corpse. When your heart hurts that much, you can't even cry. It felt like a part of her soul had been taken away with him. From now on, she had no family left in this world. Utterly alone. No past to return to, no future to look forward to. In the dead of night, she would look at her father's ashes and think, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to just go with him. They could be buried together, and they could be reunited with Mom. She had taken a large bottle of sleeping pills from the hospital, intending to leave this cruel world in her sleep. But as she held the handful of pills, her hands trembled so much she couldn't bring herself to swallow them. Why should she? Why did vicious people get to play with lives and live so recklessly, while her father, who had done nothing wrong, had to suffer such a fate? Even if she had to die, she would first collect the debts owed to her. She would drag them all down to hell with her. During this time, Ethan was living in torment. He was going mad with the need to see her, wanting to call her countless times. But he didn't dare. The image of Celia's tear-reddened eyes, filled with hatred, was like a whip lashing at his heart, a constant interrogation. If only he had told her sooner that Professor Shaw had already agreed to operate on her father next week, would things have turned out differently? Half a month later. Ethan couldn't stand it anymore. He went straight to the hospital first thing in the morning and asked the head nurse, "Hasn't Celia Carter returned from her leave yet?" The head nurse looked at him, surprised. "Director Blackwood, Celia resigned over a week ago." Ethan felt as if a hand had viciously squeezed his heart. For the first time, he lost his usual composure. He frantically pulled out his phone and dialed Celia's number. No answer. He dialed again. On the 10th consecutive call, Celia finally picked up. Ethan opened his mouth, wanting to comfort her, but felt he had no right. Celia didn't give him a chance to speak. On the other end of the line, she was standing at the airport entrance. A black hat and a long black dress shrouded her in shadow. It was a beautiful, sunny day, but not a single ray of light seemed to touch her. She held the phone, her voice calm and cold. "Ethan Blackwood, I don't believe I have ever wronged you." Ethan clenched his fists, hearing the finality in her tone. For some reason, his heart began to pound, a sense of unease enveloping him, even worse than that morning 7 years ago. Her detached words continued. That night 7 years ago, we slept together. You made all sorts of beautiful promises, but the very next day, you told me we were breaking up. I asked if we could meet one more time, but you left the country and cut off all contact. Ethan's eyes widened, his dark pupils filled with shock. That night 7 years ago, it was you. Celia heard the disbelief in his voice, but she no longer cared. Now, I'll finish what I should have said 7 years ago. Fine, Ethan Blackwood, we're breaking up. From now on, if we ever meet again, we will only be enemies. She curled her lip, her eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and resolve. Soon, I will make you all regret every single thing you ever did to me. Chapter 11, a private jet cut through the clouds and landed at Riverton Airport. Celia stepped off the plane and looked at the large sign at the airport entrance. Riverton. Unbearable memories flooded her mind. In this city, she had experienced the most profound love and the most searing hatred. And now, she had returned to settle the score. CEO Carter, your hotel has been arranged, said the young assistant who had come to greet her, following her nervously. Also, there is an industry conference tomorrow at noon. I've added it to your schedule. Celia nodded and got into the black Audi waiting for her. The screen in the car was playing the latest news. Ethan Blackwood, the second son of the prominent Blackwood family from the capital, and Genevieve Sterling, the eldest daughter of the Sterling Pharmaceutical Group, celebrated their grand engagement yesterday. The union of this golden couple signals a new expansion for the Blackwood family's medical empire. Celia watched the screen. At the press conference, countless cameras and microphones were pointed at them. Ethan held Genevieve's hand, warmly announcing their engagement. They did look like a perfect match. She watched for a moment, then turned off the screen and closed her eyes to rest. The car arrived at the hotel. The assistant handed over her ID and checked her in. Large black sunglasses covered half her face, and her shoulder-length bob made her look sharp and capable, a far cry from the fragile girl she once was. After checking in, she wheeled her suitcase into the elevator. "Hold the door, please," a pleasant female voice called out. Celia saw a slender, long-haired beauty and held the elevator door open. The woman smiled at her. "Ethan, hurry up." Celia looked in the direction the woman was speaking and saw Ethan enter the elevator with 2 assistants. An assistant held the door for him. Ethan was on the phone the whole time and didn't notice Celia in the corner. His 2 assistants stood behind him like a human wall, blocking the view. Celia's heart was as still as water. She even had the presence of mind to observe him. 5 years had made Ethan more mature. His face was like a flawless sculpture, and his aura was heavier, colder, more imposing. The elevator reached the top floor, and Ethan's group got out first. The beautiful woman walked beside him, chattering, "Oh, don't be so busy all the time. We finally get some time together, can't you pay attention to me?" Ethan didn't reply. Celia watched them enter the presidential suite, then swiped her own keycard. In her room, she rested for a while before opening her laptop to deal with work. In the evening, she went downstairs for dinner, sitting at a table by the window. She ate her salad while taking a call. The man's voice on the other end was low and magnetic. "Cease, I hope you can find a good buyer for X10923. Don't worry, I already have a lead." Celia ended the call, finished her glass of red wine, and walked toward the elevator. Ethan sat across from Genevieve, his life a monotonous series of business dealings. Genevieve buzzed around him like a noisy bee, hoping he would play the role of the perfect boyfriend in public. He looked up, his gaze drifting past the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. A graceful silhouette flashed across the glass. High heels, a short black dress, a sharp bob. It didn't look like her at all, and yet it was so much like her. Ethan whipped his head around, his heart pounding. All he caught was the hem of her skirt. "Ethan, aren't you going to eat?" Genevieve asked, bewildered, as he suddenly stood up and walked away. Celia stepped into the elevator. Just as the doors were closing, a hand shot out and stopped them. Chapter 12. A portly, middle-aged man stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Ethan stood in front of the bank of 6 elevators, their lights moving up and down, his mind still on the figure he had just seen. It had been just a fleeting glimpse, and the woman's clothes and style were completely different, but he was certain it was Celia. Genevieve hurried over. "What's wrong?" Ethan looked at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He tried to be patient. "You go on up, I have something to take care of." He turned and called his assistant, telling him to check the hotel's guest records. The Century Hotel was a major international chain with strict guest privacy policies, but if he wanted to find something out, it was only a matter of time. Soon, the guest list was in his hands. He scanned it carefully twice, but couldn't find Celia Carter's name. His assistant stood by, so intimidated by his presence that he barely dared to breathe. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Carter's name is not on the list. She might not have checked in under her own name. Check the hotel's security footage." Ethan put down the list and waved his assistant away. He stood before the massive window, looking out over the city as he lit a cigarette. Through the swirling smoke, his memory drifted back 5 years. Celia had called him, leaving a cryptic message that hinted at the truth. As he slowly unraveled the mystery and discovered what had really happened all those years ago, he realized just what and who he had lost. But all his regret was useless. She had disappeared completely, leaving no trace behind. He had waited for 5 long years, caught in a cycle of longing and struggle. Now, those 5 years were up. It was time for her to return. Celia was still unaware of any of this. In her room, she was meticulously reviewing materials, preparing for the next day's conference. The following day at noon, Celia changed into a formal, pearl-colored silk dress. Her assistant had a car ready and drove her to the Azure Pavilion. Standing before the entrance, Celia felt a wave of emotion. 5 years ago, Quentin had lured her here, a lamb to the slaughter, a plaything for others' amusement. Today, the tables had turned. It was time for her to show her fangs. Today's conference was a small banquet. Charles Quinn, the chairman of the Riverton Pharmaceutical Industry Association, had invited the province's most famous pharmaceutical company CEOs and industry leaders. The purpose of the banquet, of course, was not simply to network and dine. It was about a drug that had burst onto the scene last month, codenamed X10923. In the banquet hall, Quentin held a glass of white wine, standing next to Chairman Quinn. "I hear that at this conference, the CEO of EMT Pharmaceuticals will be here to discuss the future development rights for X10923. I'll have to trouble you to make an introduction." X10923 was a drug that had recently caused a sensation in the pharmaceutical industry. It bypassed foreign patents by using a new extraction method to create a drug that could control the growth of brain tumors. It had already entered the testing phase. The owner of X10923, EMT Pharmaceuticals, was looking for a domestic partner, and everyone was circling like sharks smelling blood. Chairman Quinn smiled. "I can't make any promises. After all, that gentleman from Capitol Hospital will also be here today." Quentin's face fell. 5 years ago, he and Isabel Vance had nearly been destroyed by Ethan Blackwood. Fortunately, his family had deep roots in Riverton. A strong dragon can't crush a local snake. By retreating to Riverton, he had managed to maintain a semblance of dignity. Now, hearing that Ethan was also vying for the development rights to X10923, he was furious. Quentin gritted his teeth, thinking of the woman who had ruined his career and nearly destroyed his reputation. If he ever saw Celia Carter again, he would make her pay back the humiliation he had suffered tenfold. Just then, the door to the room opened. Quentin looked at the woman who walked in and could hardly believe his eyes. Chapter 13, Celia Carter walked into the conference hall. Most of the people there had never seen her before. This was the elite circle of the provincial pharmaceutical industry, a world she couldn't have touched in her previous life. But now, they had all gathered here for the new drug she held in her hands. Chairman Quinn walked over to her, extending his hand first. "Miss Carter, it's been a while." Celia shook his hand briefly, her gaze shifting to Quentin. The look of shock and fury on his face brought her a deep sense of satisfaction. Noticing her gaze, Chairman Quinn quickly made the introduction. "Miss Carter, this is Director Pierce from Riverton First Hospital. He's also a specialist in the neuro-oncology department." Celia raised a hand, stopping him. "I know." Her lips, elegantly shaped and colored with lipstick, curved as she spoke 2 simple, melodious words. "Quentin Pierce." Celia Carter, Quentin, oblivious to her new identity, rushed forward. If they weren't in a public setting, he would have slapped her. You dare to come back, Celia shrugged and turned to Chairman Quinn. Chairman, I'm here today to find a partner for X10923. She gestured toward Quentin. With such an unstable element in the room, it might affect our negotiations, don't you think? Quentin stared at her in disbelief. You're the CEO of EMT Pharmaceuticals. 5 years ago, Celia Carter was just a junior nurse in his department. Now she was managing a massive pharmaceutical company. What a joke. Chairman Quinn weighed his options for a moment, then said politely to Quentin, Director Pierce, perhaps we can catch up another time. Watching Quentin storm out of the hall, Celia felt an indescribable sense of triumph. For 5 years, resentment had coiled in her heart like a hissing snake, driving her forward. Now, it was time to reap the rewards. This was only the beginning. After Quentin left, Celia spoke with Chairman Quinn for a while but made no commitments. She simply smiled and said, EMT would prefer to partner with a company that has a global perspective. Chairman Quinn nodded in understanding. Miss Carter, I understand. I'm sure you'll find a suitable partner at the banquet tonight. Just as he finished speaking, the doors to the hall opened again. Chairman Quinn looked toward the entrance and whispered to Celia, Look, he's here. Celia looked toward the door. Ethan Blackwood was a natural focal point. He entered with an effortless grace born from years of admiration, his gaze sweeping over the room as if no one else mattered. The second son of the powerful Blackwood family, now a renowned figure in the country's medical field, Ethan's arrival drew a crowd of people hoping to curry favor with him. Ethan offered a few perfunctory replies, his eyes seeking out Chairman Quinn. The next second, however, he saw Celia standing beside him. In that instant, he froze. Over the years, in the dead of night, he had imagined countless scenarios of their reunion, but none of them were like this. Forgetting everything else, Ethan pushed through the crowd and walked quickly toward her. Celia watched him approach, a perfectly composed smile on her face. Chairman Quinn hurried to introduce them. Mr. Blackwood, we've been waiting for you. Allow me to introduce you. This is Miss Carter from EMT. What? Ethan thought he had misheard. He looked at Celia. She had changed so much from a few years ago. Dressed in a moon-white evening gown, she had shed her youthful innocence and was now even more radiant and dazzling. Ethan, would you like some wine? Genevieve Sterling's voice came from behind him. She carried a glass of wine and slowly walked to his side, her hand slipping into the crook of his arm. Her gaze fell on Celia. Ethan, who is she? Chapter 14, Miss Sterling, you came with Mr. Blackwood as well. Chairman Quinn, sensing the tense atmosphere, tried to smooth things over with a cheerful laugh. This is Miss Carter, the CEO of EMT. Celia studied Genevieve Sterling, who stood beside Ethan. She was even more beautiful in person than on television, skin like snow, a delicate and slender figure, and a sweet innocence in her eyes. The way she tilted her head when she looked at someone was particularly endearing. It was a romantic purity that came from a life untouched by hardship, something Celia had once craved but had been cruelly denied. Celia was the first to extend her hand, her demeanor graceful and composed. Miss Sterling, I saw the news of your engagement to Mr. Blackwood on TV yesterday. Seeing you both today, you truly are a perfect match. Hearing her words, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He took a deep breath, forcing down the surge of excitement and bitterness into the depths of his heart. Thank you, Genevieve said with a smile, then tugged on Ethan's arm. Ethan, she's congratulating us on our engagement. Ethan forced a tight smile, saying nothing. Celia extended her hand again. Mr. Blackwood, it's a pleasure to meet you for the first time. Ethan's face was a mask of indifference, but inside, he was slowly chewing on the words first time, a bitter taste spreading through him. The atmosphere was strange and awkward. Fortunately, Chairman Quinn was a master of social situations and skillfully steered the conversation to X10923. Celia hadn't forgotten her purpose. She spoke eloquently about the drug her company was developing. Her demeanor was natural and poised, as if she and Ethan truly were meeting for the first time, merely potential business partners. Ethan watched her intently, a knot tightening in his chest. For years, finding Celia had become an obsession. The regret of his mistakes had haunted him, a deep, dark void in his heart. He desperately wanted to ask her, "Where have you been all these years? Why have you returned like this? What have you been through?" But now he had no right to ask. In front of everyone, he had to play the part of Genevieve's fiancé, even though he longed to explain everything to Celia. The evening wore on. At 9 o'clock, Celia glanced at her watch and said to Chairman Quinn, "Thank you so much for your hospitality tonight, Chairman. However, I have an online meeting with our international headquarters at 10, so I must take my leave." "Of course, let me see you out," Chairman Quinn said quickly. What he didn't expect was for Ethan to follow them out as well. Ethan watched Celia's car pull away, silently memorizing the license plate number. Back at the hotel, Celia opened her laptop and joined an online meeting with her team in Europe. By the time the meeting ended, it was almost 11. Suddenly, she heard a knock at the door. "Who is it?" she asked. It was too late for room service. There was no answer, just the steady, rhythmic knocking. Knock, knock, knock. In the dead of night, it was slightly unnerving, but she wasn't afraid. Celia slowly walked to the door. She already had a guess, but she still peeked through the peephole. She opened the door. It was only a crack, but it was immediately forced open. The man smelled strongly of tobacco. It was the middle of summer, but his hand was cool as he grabbed her wrist like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. Celia and Ethan's eyes met. She could read a storm of emotions in his longing, grievance, anger, but she had no intention of responding. "Do you have any idea I've been looking for you for 5 years?" Chapter 15. Celia looked at him and found the situation almost laughable. "You've been looking for me for 5 years?" Celia curled her lip into a smirk. She raised a finger, pressed it against his chest, and slowly, firmly pushed him back. Celia pulled out her phone, typed Ethan Blackwood Genevieve Sterling into the search bar, and the screen filled with news reports of their engagement. She turned the phone around and held it up for him to see. "Is this how you've been looking for me?" A look of frustration crossed Ethan's face. "That has nothing to do with us," he explained. "She and I are just business partners. You don't need to explain anything to me." "I don't care, and I don't want to know." Celia set her phone aside and leaned against the entryway cabinet, her arms crossed, her expression cold. "I came back to Riverton on business. I hope you can maintain a professional attitude in our relationship as well, Mr. Blackwood." Ethan's face darkened. The years had only amplified his commanding presence. His stern expression was incredibly intimidating. "And what if I say no?" Ethan braced one hand against the cabinet, looking down at her. Celia laughed as if she'd heard the funniest joke. "Mr. Blackwood, don't tell me that after 5 years you're still hung up on me." Ethan didn't speak, his silent gaze a form of admission. Years of regret had festered into an obsession, growing deeper and more profound over time. "Belated affection is more useless than an appendix," she said, her lips twisting into a mocking smile. "Not only is it completely pointless, but sometimes it just causes trouble and makes you miserable." "Celia Carter, I never knew you could be so sharp-tongued," Ethan said, his face grim. He had lived a life of privilege, accustomed to people bowing to his will. This was the first time anyone had ever berated him so harshly. "So, stop harassing me." Celia slipped out from under his arm, opened the door, and said, "It's late, don't keep your fiancé waiting." Ethan knew he had no reason to stay, but he was unwilling, unable to leave. Just then, Genevieve walked by the open door, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan, Miss Carter, what's going on?" "Just business," Celia said calmly. "In fact, Mr. Blackwood was just leaving. He said he needed to get back to his fiancée." After sending Ethan and his fiancée on their way, Celia closed the door, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. In truth, she wasn't as calm as she appeared. But after weathering so many storms, she had learned to bury even the deepest emotions, hiding them away where no one could see. A sudden phone call broke her train of thought. Celia answered, her voice all business. "Yes, they're all very interested in X10923, but I've already set my sights on a bigger fish." "Don't tell me it's Ethan Blackwood," the man's voice on the other end teased. "Still can't forget him after all these years." "I wouldn't say I can't forget him, but the thought of making him pay a little has never left my mind," Celia said with a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "What exactly happened between you and Ethan back then?" the man asked, clearing his throat. "You don't have to say if you don't want to. There's nothing I can't say." Celia leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window and slowly began to remember. Many years ago, when she was just a girl, she had fallen for Ethan at first sight. Back then, he had been so good to her, so good that she had started to believe in forever. Chapter 16, the night of his graduation, his friends had gotten him completely drunk. She remembered it clearly. They had laughingly handed him over to her, along with a hotel key card, and told her to take him back. Drunk Ethan was adorable. His usual cool composure was gone, replaced by a clingy, puppy-like affection. He held her, kissed her neck, and told her that as soon as she graduated, they would get married. He promised her the grandest wedding, booking the most luxurious rooftop restaurant in the capital so the stars themselves could witness their love. He had spoken with such sincerity that she had believed him. But what happened next felt like a brutal slap in the face. How could a wealthy young man from the capital ever truly fall for an ordinary girl like her? That night, Ethan had been passionate and demanding. Afterward, they both fell into a deep sleep. A phone call woke her in the early hours of the morning. She didn't dare tell her parents she had just slept with Ethan, so she quickly dressed and left. She felt utterly wrecked that night. Her body ached as she took the bus home and carefully slipped into bed. The next morning, she woke up late, a sweet smile still on her face, only to receive a text from him, breaking up with her. She asked if they could meet one last time. He never replied. A few days later, Ethan left the country with Isabel Vance. It took many years, piecing together bits of information from different people, for Celia to learn the truth of what happened. That night, she was the one who had slept with Ethan. But after she left, Isabel had deceived him. And that wasn't all. Isabel had also spread rumors that Celia had slept with another man, even photoshopping pictures as proof. Young and proud, Ethan had left the country in a fit of anger. And so, they lost contact. 7 years passed in a flash. Celia leaned against the hotel window, watching the glittering city lights. The traffic below was a long, glowing river, flowing toward an unknown destination. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. It fell to the floor, like her lost youth, gone forever. The man on the phone listened to the long, melodramatic story, and after a long silence, asked one question. "I'm just curious, who did Isabel Photoshop you into a picture with?" Celia smiled faintly, still leaning against the window. "You," she said softly. That night, she was not the only one in the hotel reminiscing about their youth. The memory of her young, smiling face was also deeply etched in Ethan's mind. Genevieve watched him silently. In the years she had known him, Ethan had always been confident and full of life. She had never seen him look so desolate. "What is your relationship with Celia Carter?" Genevieve finally asked. Ethan scoffed. "What does that have to do with you?" Genevieve grew anxious, a fire of jealousy burning within her, directed at this woman she had never met who could so easily provoke Ethan's emotions. "What do you mean, what does it have to do with me?" "Ethan, you're my fiancé," Genevieve exclaimed, her anger showing for the first time. "I told you before the engagement that this was just an act," Ethan said, with a slight raise of his eyebrow. "What, did you actually start to take it seriously?" The menace and coldness in his eyes made Genevieve take a step back. Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head in disbelief, covered her face, and ran out, slamming the door behind her. Ethan watched her go, a sense of detachment washing over him. Many years ago, Celia had been like that, so fragile she would cry at the slightest provocation. Only now, after all this time, did he realize it wasn't that Celia was weak. It was that she had faced too many hardships, enough to crush her slender shoulders. When they were young, he had promised to shield her from the storms of life. But in reality, he was the one who had pushed her into the storm. Chapter 17, the next morning, Celia woke up early. Last night at the conference, she had spoken with several pharmaceutical company CEOs. They were all interested in the subsequent development of X10923 and had scheduled meetings with her, though none of them were her real target. She was having breakfast in the downstairs restaurant. Just as she lifted her coffee to her lips, she saw Genevieve Sterling standing before her. "We need to talk." Genevieve wore sunglasses with pink lenses that hid her slightly red and swollen eyes. Celia was surprised. She hadn't expected Genevieve to approach her directly. "Miss Sterling, what would you like to talk about?" Celia asked softly, setting down her coffee cup. "There are too many people here. Let's go somewhere else." Genevieve kept glancing toward the elevators, clearly worried Ethan might come down and see her. Celia smiled. "If you want to talk about Ethan, I think you'd be wasting your breath." "How can you be so shameless?" Genevieve clearly misunderstood her meaning. Ethan is engaged to me, and the Blackwood family is very happy with me. He would never break off our engagement. Celia was taken aback. Looking at the arrogant and domineering Genevieve, she suddenly realized that the so-called innocence and charm was just a facade this young lady put on for Ethan. Her current demeanor reminded her of someone else, Ethan's mother. The woman who had once thrown cash in her face and had security escort her out of the villa complex. Miss Sterling, I think you've misunderstood. I have no intention of interfering in your relationship with Mr. Blackwood, Celia said, her eyes narrowing slightly. I'd appreciate it if you didn't say things like that again. Don't try to fool me. Isabel Vance already told me everything, Genevieve scoffed. You and Ethan may have known each other a long time ago, but the fact that you never ended up together clearly means you're not meant to be. Besides, do you really think a family like the Blackwoods would ever approve of you? As if that wasn't enough, she continued, and don't think you've made it just because you're the CEO of EMT now. Let's be honest, you don't even have shares in the company. You're still just an employee, right? So you do remember that I'm the CEO of EMT. Celia's lips curved into a slight smile. Then you should also know that I'm only in Riverton to find a suitable partner for the development of X10923. You want a partner with Ethan? Genevieve asked, a hint of anger in her voice. Although she wasn't involved in her family's business, she knew that X10923 had been making waves ever since it entered the testing phase. The brain was the body's most complex organ, and treating brain tumors had always been one of medicine's greatest challenges. The brain is full of nerves, and even the most skilled surgeons couldn't fully control the outcome of an operation. But X10923 was different. Through simple oral and injectable methods, it could significantly slow the growth of brain tumors and, to some extent, control the disease. Compared to undergoing risky surgery with a mortality rate of over 50, X10923 was far more reliable and psychologically more acceptable to patients. You don't seriously think you can use the development rights of X10923 to get back together with him, do you? Genevieve sneered. The Blackwood family is a massive enterprise. They might not even be interested in your little project. Celia laughed. Why do you assume I have to partner with him? Seeing that Genevieve was about to argue further, she held up a hand, suddenly sat up straight, and leaned toward her. If I were you, I would be trying to secure this partnership for my own family, not trying to sabotage someone else's project. After all, the Sterling family's Sterling Pharma is one of the most renowned pharmaceutical companies in the country, isn't it? Chapter 18, Celia's words were like bait, opening up a whole new world for Genevieve. As a woman in her family, she had never been taken seriously or involved in the family business. Her parents and brothers all treated her like a decorative vase, useful only for a marriage alliance. She had agreed to Ethan's proposal thinking that, by being close to him, she might be able to develop real feelings. But why did she have to be a pawn in this alliance? Why couldn't she secure the development rights for X10923 for the Sterling family herself? Why should I believe you? Genevieve asked, her composure returning. Because I don't want to partner with Ethan, but I also don't want him to sabotage my partnerships with other companies, Celia said with a shrug. As you know, EMT is a mature pharmaceutical company with comprehensive R&D capabilities. All we need is funding and sales channels. Many domestic pharmaceutical companies can meet those needs. The Blackwood family is just the strongest among them. You don't want to partner with Ethan? Genevieve was skeptical. Why, Miss Sterling, Ethan and I do have a past, but that was a long time ago. Celia lowered her eyes, hiding the emotion within them. Now I have my own career and my own life. I have no intention of getting entangled in that messy past again. Is that explanation acceptable to you? Genevieve didn't say whether she believed her or not. I'll contact my father. If he has time, he'll come and meet you, Genevieve said. Suddenly, her expression turned panicked and she quickly stood up. Celia didn't turn around. In this hotel, the only person who could elicit such a terrified reaction from Genevieve was obvious. Sure enough, the next second, she heard Ethan's voice. What are you doing here? His voice was sharp, clearly displeased with Genevieve's actions. It reminded Celia of many years ago. Back then, when she was being harassed by Ethan's mother and Isabel, She had fantasized that Ethan would swoop in and protect her from all the turmoil. Unfortunately, by the time he was willing to step in, she no longer needed him. "Miss Sterling and I were just having a chat. You shouldn't be so harsh with her." Celia stood up and smiled at him like an old friend playfully teasing a couple. But her casual demeanor only made Ethan more frustrated. He didn't want to see her act so detached. He would rather she yell at him, question him, demand compensation. He was willing to compensate her handsomely, to give her a long string of numbers, the grandest wedding, to fulfill all the promises he had made when they were young, even if it came at a great cost. He would rather pay that price than see this cold, indifferent Celia. It was as if, in her heart, the past was truly over. There was nothing left between them but painful, shattered memories. "Chatting?" He grabbed her wrist, his face suddenly very close to hers. "What were you chatting about? Is it something I can hear?" "Let go." She struggled to free herself, stepping back. Her high heel caught on the leg of a nearby chair, and she stumbled sideways. Ethan caught her, pulling her into his arms. He smelled of a faint, woody scent, the same cologne he had worn for a decade, steady and lingering. Chapter 19, Thank You. Celia pressed a hand against his chest. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, she could feel the lean muscle beneath and the frantic beating of his heart. With visible restraint, Ethan let her go. Celia picked up her clutch from the table and turned to leave. Ethan's eyes followed her until she disappeared into the elevator. Genevieve watched him. It was the first time she had seen Ethan look at a woman with such intense focus. The look in his eyes was so powerful it frightened her. She slowly approached him and tugged on his sleeve. "Ethan, have you had breakfast? Do you want to eat together?" Ethan turned to her. "Stay away from her from now on." I really didn't say anything," Genevieve said, reverting to her usual sweet and innocent act. "I heard about her from Isabel Vance." "I told you to stop associating with Isabel," Ethan warned. "I'm sorry, I was just curious," Genevieve said, lowering her head, testing the waters. "I just wanted to know what kind of person she is so we could get along in the future." "Get along? Why would you need to get along with her?" Ethan's voice was low but clear. "Our engagement may need to be called off soon." Genevieve's head snapped up and she grabbed his sleeve. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. I'm telling you to prepare yourself." Ethan slowly but firmly removed her hand. "I'm the one breaking the contract, so you can ask for compensation. As long as it's not unreasonable, I'll grant it." Genevieve looked into his determined eyes and was silent for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, Are you insane?" Ethan didn't reply. He just turned and walked away. That evening, Celia received a message from Genevieve asking to meet at the Giangia Club the next night. She readily agreed, though she was a bit suspicious. She had expected Genevieve to contact her, but she hadn't thought it would be so soon. After all, this was essentially stealing a deal from her own fiancé. Genevieve, or rather, the Sterling family, seemed to have no qualms about it. Or perhaps this was just the hypocrisy of high society? Celia smirked and walked to the entryway to pour herself a glass of red wine. Just then, her phone rang. The screen displayed a familiar, unsaved number. It was Ethan. She thought for a moment, then declined the call. A second later, the phone rang again, persistent. She listened to the ringtone for a moment before swiping to answer. She said nothing, not even bothering to ask how he got her number. "I'm on the top floor. Come up, what do you say?" Ethan's deep, steady voice came through the phone. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't think we're close enough to be drinking and chatting at night," Celia said, swirling the wine in her glass. "What if I said I wanted to discuss the X10923 development partnership? Clearly, there are plenty of pharmaceutical companies in this country willing to discuss this deal with me." Celia's voice was laced with a playful mockery, as if laughing at his overconfidence. "But can any of those partners offer you terms as generous as mine?" Ethan sounded certain, leaving her no room to refuse. "Celia, I am determined to get this project. If you don't come up, I'll have to go to EMT's parent company." Celia's expression darkened. She slammed her wine glass down on the table. Ethan seemed to have anticipated her reaction. "I'll be waiting for you on the top floor," he said softly. "I've ordered your favorite dishes. It's windy tonight, so bring a shawl." Chapter 20, At 8 o'clock that evening, Celia arrived at the rooftop restaurant. She wore a V-neck lace dress with light makeup, a simple shawl draped over her shoulders. The rooftop was spacious, but only one table was lit. She slowly walked over and sat down across from Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood, clearing out an entire restaurant just for me? I didn't know our business was so secretive," she teased, breaking the romantic tension in the air. Ethan stood up and pulled out her chair. "You really know how to ruin a mood." Celia felt a flicker of satisfaction. That was her intention, just like you always did. Ethan's voice from above her extinguished that small spark of triumph. The waiter began to serve the food, but Celia had no appetite. Ethan noticed her lack of interest and quickly produced a project proposal. "I didn't want to discuss business at the dinner table, but if I don't bring this out now, I'm afraid you won't even stay to finish the meal." "You worry too much, Mr. Blackwood." Celia took the proposal, but made no move to open it. "If there's nothing else I should..." "There is." Ethan frowned slightly. "Aren't you going to look at the proposal? See the terms I'm offering?" Celia smiled at him. She knew, of course, that Ethan would offer her incredibly generous terms to move the project forward. But what she wanted from him was more than just a thin stack of papers. X10923 was just the bait. The real prize was yet to come. "Actually, no matter what terms you offer, I won't agree to partner with you," Celia said. Ethan felt she was provoking him. He patiently tried to reason with her. "My offer is the best you'll get. You're only refusing me now because you're angry." He lowered his gaze, his voice low as he tried to control his emotions. "I've been following X10923 since it was first announced. Back then, if your father had had a drug like this, maybe..." "Shut up," Celia shot to her feet, her voice cutting through the quiet night, tearing away the thin veil of polite hypocrisy between them. He hadn't forgotten the past, and she certainly couldn't. "You have no right to mention my father." Celia threw the project proposal at him. The loose pages scattered in the strong rooftop wind like a shattered painting. Ethan sat in the eye of the storm, a deep, profound pain in his eyes as he looked at her. "I'm truly sorry for what happened back then." Ethan stood up, trying to explain. "At that time, I had already contacted..." "Sorry," Celia cut him off, her laugh more painful than a cry. "Your apology is worth a fortune, isn't it? I can't afford it." She turned and walked toward the exit. Ethan watched her go, then slowly sat back down, clutching his chest. A deep sense of powerlessness washed over him. Celia wouldn't even listen to his explanation. Or maybe the truth didn't matter anymore. Whatever the truth was, it couldn't change the fact that her father was gone, and it couldn't bring back the years they had lost. Ethan sat alone in the restaurant. A moment later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was an octave higher than usual, barely suppressing its anger. "Ethan, is it true you're breaking off the engagement? Have you lost your mind? I will not allow this." Chapter 21:9 in the morning. Emerald City Club. Celia wore a white pantsuit, her high heels clicking crisply on the marble floor, exuding an air of decisive confidence. She pushed open the door to the private room. Genevieve Sterling and a distinguished-looking middle-aged man were sitting at a table, chatting. "Sorry I'm late," Celia said with a smile. "Not at all. It's not even 10. We were a bit early," the vice president of Sterling Pharma said, smoothing things over. Celia sat down. A cup of green tea was placed before her. She looked at the teacup, and for some reason, her mind drifted back many years. Back then, when her father was still alive, she had gone to the Azure Pavilion to ask Quentin for help. She was forced to drink as a penalty for being late. In reality, whether she was late or not didn't matter. It was simply the law of the jungle. A helpless young woman like her was nothing more than a plaything for them to torment. "Miss Carter?" Genevieve raised her voice slightly. Celia snapped back to the present, smiled apologetically, and nodded at her. Then she turned to the middle-aged man. "You must be Mr. Chen, from Sterling Pharma. I've heard so much about you." Mr. Chen shook her hand, and they immediately began discussing the development partnership for X10923. Genevieve sat by, occasionally chiming in. The atmosphere was surprisingly congenial. They didn't fully agree on the investment issues, but other aspects of the deal were settled quite smoothly. "We've reached a consensus on several points today. I'm sure you can see that Sterling is very sincere about this partnership," Mr. Chen said, standing up. "If you're available next Monday, we can meet at Sterling headquarters. Our chairman, Mr. Sterling, would like to speak with you personally." Celia readily agreed. Leaving the club, Celia found her car waiting for her. As she got in, her mind replayed the meeting. Compared to Isabel Vance, Genevieve Sterling was much more composed and generous. Of course, that might be because Celia was no longer the helpless, penniless girl she once was, but the CEO of EMT. When you climb to the top, everyone looking up at you has a friendly face. She returned to the hotel and after lunch had a long online meeting. It was so long that she couldn't resist sending a message to the man at their European headquarters, telling him to wrap it up. As the sun set, she closed her laptop and went out for dinner. When she saw Ethan waiting by her door again, Celia frowned. A ripple disturbed the calm surface of her heart. "Mr. Blackwood, are you really this free?" Celia's lips curved into a smirk. "So free you have time to stake out my hotel room? Why didn't you answer my calls?" Ethan entered the room, closing the door behind him. "I wasn't aware our relationship required us to be in constant contact," Celia said, watching him frown with a sense of satisfaction. She knew her words would hurt him, but she wanted him to be hurt. She wanted him to feel a fraction of what she had once felt. Ethan took a deep breath, suppressing his frustration. "Do you have to speak to me like this?" he asked softly. Celia looked up at him. When her eyes met his, her heart jolted. Chapter 22, she broke his gaze, turning to look at the dark sky outside the floor-to-ceiling window. "If there's nothing else," before she could finish, Ethan cut her off. "What's this about the X10923 development project?" His handsome brows furrowed. "Were the terms I offered not generous enough? I don't know what you're talking about." Celia turned to leave, but Ethan grabbed her arm. "You think I don't know?" He looked down at her. "You want a partner with Sterling Pharma. You've already met with their people, haven't you?" Celia was shocked. She hadn't expected Genevieve to be so careless as to tell Ethan about their meeting before the deal was even finalized. "It wasn't Genevieve who told me." Ethan seemed to guess her thoughts, a slight curve to his lips. "When I'm set on a project, I have my ways of finding out what I need to know." Celia shook his hand off. "Sterling Pharma is a very capable company. Partnering with them gives EMT a stronger negotiating position." "You're lying," Ethan interrupted. Caught in her lie, Celia dropped the pretense. "Fine, you want the truth?" She glared at him, her expression defiant. "I just don't want to work with you. Are you satisfied with that answer?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a cold laugh. "You hate me that much? You turned down free money just to avoid doing business with me." "You're not the only one who can offer me money," Celia said, wagging a finger at him. "Is that so?" Ethan's face grew cold. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. "I am determined to get this project." Celia looked at him and realized he was serious. "Celia, I will contact Dr. X directly," Ethan said, his voice soft but carrying a clear warning. "As the project's lead researcher, I imagine he has more say in this than you do." With that, he opened the door and left. Celia sat on the sofa, thinking about his words, his expression. A scoff escaped her lips. After all these years, she still knew him. He would never let their past get in the way of what he wanted. The supposed entanglement, the deep affection, it was all meaningless. When it came to business, he was still the same cool, decisive, and ruthless Ethan Blackwood. Knowing he couldn't get the development rights from her, he immediately changed tactics and went after the creator of X10923. It was a clever move, cutting her off at the source. But unfortunately for him, she was no longer the Celia Carter of the past. In the last 5 years, she had grown much faster than he could have imagined. The moment Ethan closed the door behind him, he regretted his words. But the thought of Celia avoiding him like the plague made it impossible to control himself. She could always so easily provoke him, making him say hurtful things that only pushed her further away. Ethan lit a cigarette. Through the smoke, he heard a knock on the door. For a second, his heart leaped. Inappropriate fantasies flashed through his mind. He crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, stood up, and opened the door. "We need to talk," she said. Chapter 23, Genevieve Sterling stood at the door, looking at Ethan with pleading eyes. Ethan just felt annoyed. The disappointment and anger swirling inside him left no room for even a fake smile. "Talk about what? How you're trying to steal a project from under my nose." Her little games behind his back had infuriated him. "Ethan, at least let me come in," Genevieve said, biting her lip, her voice begging. Ethan sighed. Not wanting to make a scene, he stepped aside and let her in. After closing the door, Genevieve sat on the sofa and began to brew a pot of tea. She acted as if nothing had happened, casually preparing the tea and then calling out, "Ethan, come have some tea." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't actually think a cup of tea is enough of an apology, do you?" "Of course not." Genevieve shook her head. "I wanted to talk to you about something else. About the development rights for X10923? Ethan sat down on the sofa, not touching the tea. "Other than that, I can't imagine what we have to talk about. What difference does it make whether you or I get the development rights for X10923? Genevieve said, her voice laced with grievance. "The Blackwood Corporation is massive. It doesn't need a small project like this." "That's no excuse for backstabbing me," Ethan said coldly. "I didn't," Genevieve protested. "I told your mother about this project. She said that if I wanted it, Sterling could take it on. Didn't she tell you?" Ethan closed his eyes. His mother had indeed told him, and he had made his decision then and there to break off the engagement with Genevieve. "I just thought, whether it's you or me, as long as the project ends up in our hands, it's all the same, right?" Genevieve moved to kneel at his feet, resting her head on his knee in a gesture of utter submission. "Ethan, we have an engagement." Genevieve cut the act. Ethan gripped her chin, looking down at her. "I've seen this show before. Playing the victim won't work on me." Genevieve lowered her eyes. What if I told you I'm willing to tolerate Celia Carter?" She had played her trump card. Ethan frowned, watching her. She placed her hands on his knees, a picture of complete dependence. "Ethan, I heard your story from Isabel Vance. I know you two have a long history and missed out on many years. I'm willing to let you have her. I'm willing to share you with Celia." Seeing a flicker of emotion in his eyes, she thought she had won him over. "Your mother will insist you marry someone of equal standing. I can tolerate things other women can't, because I love you. I'm willing. Get out." Ethan felt he had reached his limit. He couldn't stand to hear another word of her absurd, disgusting proposal. He pulled Genevieve to her feet and dragged her to the door. Genevieve didn't understand what she had said wrong. She had seen countless arranged marriages where the wife was expected to tolerate her husband's affairs. It was normal. She was willing to make that concession, especially after Celia had made the first move by offering her the X10923 development rights. She didn't understand why Ethan would react with such fury. "Celia must have agreed to it. Why else would she offer me the development rights for X10923? Genevieve clung to the doorframe, making a last-ditch effort. Celia, holding a cup of coffee and her laptop, happened to be walking by and overheard the conversation. She couldn't help but ask, "I agreed to what?" Chapter 24, Ethan's face was a thundercloud. Celia, however, was intrigued. Seeing Ethan in distress stirred a complex mix of emotions, in her a sour tang of bitterness, mixed with a strange sense of satisfaction. "Miss Sterling, my decision to partner with Sterling Pharma was based purely on the fact that your company meets my requirements for a partner," Celia said with a small smile. "It was a business decision, nothing more. I hope you haven't misunderstood." At her words, Genevieve shot her a look of pure venom. To this day, Genevieve had never believed Celia's claims of having no ulterior motives regarding Ethan. Who would reject a man like Ethan Blackwood, a man blessed by the heavens? For a woman with no background like Celia, latching onto him was far more valuable than being the so-called CEO of EMT. Celia paid no mind to Genevieve's thoughts. She took a sip of her coffee and turned to leave. After a few steps, she seemed to remember something and turned back, a brilliant smile gracing her lips as she looked at Ethan. Now, her poise was unshakable, her every move exuding the elegant confidence of a mature woman. "And I hope you haven't misunderstood either, Mr. Blackwood." With that, Celia turned and walked away, but a fire was smoldering inside Ethan Blackwood. Of course, he knew Celia Carter would never agree to what Genevieve Sterling had suggested, this idea of sharing their relationship. In truth, it wasn't that she didn't want to share him. She didn't want him at all. She didn't want the project he offered, she didn't want the benefits he was willing to concede, and she certainly didn't want his compensation. Ultimately, she didn't want him. As this reality settled in, his spirits sank to their lowest point. When he couldn't find her, all he could think about was finding her. But now that she was really here, standing before him, he had no idea what to do. After so many years, she was no longer the innocent, fragile 18-year-old Celia he once knew. "You should go," Ethan sighed, no longer wanting to argue with Genevieve. Our engagement is off. You can make up whatever excuse you like. Ethan, I really don't want to. Genevieve was on the verge of tears, her eyes welling up. Ethan looked at her. From a certain angle, Genevieve bore a slight resemblance to Celia, especially when she was about to cry. The sight of her tear-filled eyes could make him do a double take. Perhaps that was why he had been so indulgent with her, even choosing her as a shield when he needed an arranged marriage. It had led Genevieve to harbor hopes she never should have had. But Celia was back, and all of this had to end. Don't cry, Ethan said softly. I have a property in the south of the capital. I'll have it transferred to your name as my compensation. Without waiting for her reaction, he turned and walked toward the hotel lobby. Genevieve stared blankly at his retreating back. The fragile, pitiful expression on her face slowly faded, replaced by an icy glint in her eyes that stood in stark contrast to her delicate, beautiful features. She moved to a secluded corner, took out her phone, and dialed a number. It rang only a few times before it was answered. Jenny, are you busy today? If you have time, come watch the fashion show with me. Genevieve sniffled, her voice a pathetic whine. Auntie, I don't think I can make it. Ethan, he just told me, he wants to call off our engagement. I don't understand what I did wrong. Chapter 25, the woman sitting in the Dome restaurant had a languid air about her. Even seated, her gaze was condescending, appraising. Celia Carter sat down across from her, looking around the empty, cleared-out restaurant. For a fleeting moment, she thought how remarkably similar Ethan and his mother were. I never expected it would be you, Celia said softly. The meeting had been arranged with Genevieve Sterling, but it was Ethan's mother, Victoria Blackwood, who had shown up. Seeing Victoria again after so many years, Celia realized that the memory had been there all along, buried deep in her mind, never truly fading. Even now, she could clearly remember the day she had tried to find Ethan, only to be thrown out of the villa. She remembered the disdainful look in the woman's eyes, as if she were staring at trash. Jenny is young. Of course, I have to help her deal with unexpected complications, Victoria said, a corner of her mouth twitching with impatience. I don't know what you're talking about, Celia shrugged, her expression calm and unbothered. EMT and Sterling Pharma are considering a partnership. I'm sure you've heard. Miss Sterling and I will likely be business partners soon. Don't think I can't see through your little tricks, Victoria sneered. You're just trying to become Sterling's partner, so it'll be awkward for them to move against you. Do you really think I can't see through such a petty scheme? Celia shook her head and stood up. If that's what you want to believe, there's nothing I can do. Stop right there, Victoria snapped. Did I say you could leave? Mrs. Blackwood, have you made some kind of mistake? Celia turned back. I am the CEO of EMT. My potential partner is Sterling Pharma. Does this have anything to do with the Blackwood family? Why are you meddling in other people's business? Ethan wants to break off his engagement with Jenny because of you, Victoria said, glaring at her with hatred. If it weren't for a vixen like you, Ethan would have married a girl from a suitable family years ago. He wouldn't have dragged this out until now. Celia froze for a second. What does that have to do with me? Her face remained a mask of detached calm. I returned to this country to do business. I hope you'll inform Miss Sterling that in business, we should stick to business. If she continues to entertain these strange ideas, our collaboration might not go smoothly. I don't mind finding another partner. Celia Carter, can you swear you didn't come back for my son? Victoria demanded. If I had wanted to, I would have come back long ago, Celia replied ambiguously. Celia Carter, I remember warning you years ago not to get involved with Ethan. He is not for a girl from a backwater family like yours to aspire to. Victoria's voice followed her from behind. I hope you remember what I said. Otherwise, I will make you pay the price. Celia walked on without looking back, a bitter laugh rising in her throat. Her parents were dead, and she was utterly alone in the world. What price was there left for her to pay? Stepping out of the Dome restaurant, Celia glanced back at the skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. Some people were born at the very top of the pyramid. They were blind to the joys and sorrows of others, free to trample on their dignity and manipulate their lives. She had nothing left to lose. Dragging the bastards who had once hurt her down to hell with her, that would be the meaning of the rest of her life. She averted her gaze and checked a new text message on her phone. Chapter 26, Celia replied to the message. I understand. After returning to the hotel, she had her assistant check her out. Carrying her few belongings, she moved into an apartment. Her assistant had rented a flat for her in the heart of Jiangcheng. That very evening, Ethan Blackwood followed her there. When she opened the door and saw him, Celia wasn't the least bit surprised. "Mr. Blackwood, is there really a need to haunt me like this?" Celia didn't bother trying to kick him out. She knew it would be futile for now. Once she finished her business and left the country, she would finally be free of him. Out of sight, out of mind. "I had to see where you moved with my own eyes before I could rest easy," Ethan said, his gaze intense, almost sincere. If he could, he would tie a rope to her wrist and keep her by his side forever. He truly couldn't bear another separation. Time flew by so quickly. How many more chances could they afford to miss? How many more goodbyes could they endure? "Well, you've seen it now. Can you leave?" Celia poured herself a glass of water. Ethan took the glass from her and drank from it, his Adam's apple bobbing. Celia glanced away, then deliberately shifted her gaze. Even though she harbored a deep-seated hatred for this man, she had to admit he was exceptionally handsome. "Not yet," Ethan said, putting the glass down and walking further into the apartment. The place was newly rented, showing no signs of life. The decor was a cold palette of black, white, and gray, with marble countertops so clean they reflected his image. Ethan surveyed the room, then sat down on an armchair. "I've found Dr. X." Dr. X and the team behind X10923 were its developers, holding the core research technology and all related intellectual property rights. Dr. X was a scientist who had risen to prominence in recent years, known for being a recluse who rarely interacted with outsiders, reportedly spending all their time in the lab. EMT was Dr. X's partner company. By bypassing Celia and going directly to Dr. X, Ethan was effectively cutting the ground from under her. But Celia already knew. Ethan mistook her composure for a desperate attempt to stay calm. "Celia, I don't want to threaten you," Ethan said with a slight smile, like a mischievous child who had just won a game. "But with Blackwood Corporation's resources, we can fully take over the development and subsequent research of X10923. We can even handle the entire domestic distribution network, controlling the whole industrial chain from top to bottom. You understand what that means, don't you?" He slowly walked over to her, his voice coming from just above her head. The familiar scent of fur would clung to him, exuding a captivating danger. Of course, Celia knew what it meant. It meant that if Ethan wanted to, he could partner directly with Dr. X at any time and kick EMT to the curb. "If I were to do that, how would you explain it to your parent company?" EMT was a relatively small RD firm, backed by the capital of New China Group. As one of the key figures at Blackwood, Ethan knew all too well the immense pressure a CEO carried behind their glamorous facade. A CEO who returns to their home country to find a partner, only to lose the project, would be finished in the industry. "What do you want?" Celia asked softly, looking up at him. Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist, his gaze burning as he looked down at her. "What do I want, don't you know?" Chapter 27, Celia pressed her hands against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "He's excited," she thought. A sarcastic smile touched her lips. "Mr. Blackwood, since this is a negotiation, let's talk business. Why not propose terms that are actually achievable?" With that, she slipped gracefully from his embrace. Ethan let his arms fall to his sides. A flicker of disappointment crossed his eyes before he quickly concealed it. "Tomorrow night, accompany me to a banquet in the capital," Ethan said. "That shouldn't be too difficult a request to fulfill, right?" "It's not difficult," Celia smiled, then countered, "but is it necessary? If I accompany you to the banquet, what will you do with your little fiancé?" "I don't have a fiancé," Ethan said, looking at her with stark sincerity. He explained, word by word, our relationship was always just a business arrangement. The engagement was merely a transaction. "No wonder you're such a brilliant businessman, Mr. Blackwood. To use even marriage as a bargaining chip, that's truly something most people couldn't do." Celia's words were like a dagger to Ethan's heart, piercing the thick armor he wore. The wind whistled through the gash, stinging with pain. He finally lost control, striding forward and grabbing her wrist, forcefully pinning her against the wall. He was so close she could feel the rhythm of his heart and the warmth of his breath, a warmth that told her this was real, not some illusory dream. I looked for you for 5 whole years. I didn't know where you went. I didn't even know if you were still alive. Ethan's voice was low, overflowing with a mixture of anger and sorrow. You said you'd come back for revenge, and I've been waiting, but why did you make me wait so long? Celia struggled, trying to push him away. You want revenge, don't you? How do you plan to get it? I handed the project to you on a silver platter, and you refused it. Is this your revenge? Ethan held her fast. A man's strength was far greater than a woman's. He could immobilize her with one hand. Her vibrant, supple body struggled against him, and it took every ounce of Ethan's self-control to restrain his impulses. Ethan Blackwood, are you insane? Celia slammed her head against his chin, her defiant posture burning into his eyes like a brand. Do you think I'm still that pitiful little girl you could bully whenever you wanted? Celia wrenched free and shoved him toward the door. I'm not that Celia Carter anymore. The door slammed shut. Separated by the door, both the person inside and the person outside were dejected. Celia slowly sank to the floor, her chest tight and heavy, as if stuffed with cotton. After a long while, a slip of paper was pushed under the door. Celia was suddenly reminded of their student days, years ago, when Ethan had coaxed her in the same way. Life had been innocent and romantic then. The biggest problems were trivial matters that could be smoothed over with a few words, as if nothing had ever happened. On the paper, written neatly in pen, were 2 words, I'm sorry. Celia sniffled and pushed the note back out. A moment later, it reappeared. This time, another sentence had been added. Tomorrow at 10, I'll have someone pick you up. Celia crumpled the paper into a ball and tossed it into the trash. The next morning at 10 o'clock, a Bentley pulled up downstairs right on time. Chapter 28, dressed in casual clothes, Celia got into the car with a nonchalant air. Ethan was waiting inside for her. He didn't want to miss a single moment he could spend with her. Once in the car, Celia said nothing, immediately pulling out her tablet to deal with work. EMT wasn't a large company, and each department was run by experienced staff, which was why she could manage things remotely from so far away. Ethan watched her quietly, his mind drifting back to years ago, to the image of her studying diligently at her desk. I never asked you, why did you drop out of university back then? Ethan asked. Celia had been admitted to Jiangcheng Medical University and had excellent grades. Even without connections, she should have become a doctor after graduation, not a nurse. Ethan had looked into her past and discovered that she had dropped out in her senior year, never receiving her diploma. Why did I drop out? Celia looked up at him. You don't know why. During my senior year, thugs kept showing up at the university to bother me, sometimes getting physical. I received a lot of horror packages, dead rats, bugs, and even a severed finger, Celia recounted slowly. Then, one day while I was walking, a flower pot fell from a rooftop. I don't know if it was an accident or, Celia gave a small, humorless laugh. I never caused trouble. I don't even know anyone outside of school. Who do you think hired those thugs? Ethan was silent for a long time. The casual way Celia told the story felt like a whip lashing at his heart. During her senior year, he had wanted to return to the country to find her. His mother and Isabel Vance both knew about it, but he never imagined that a single thought of his could unleash such a devastating storm in her life. What was Celia thinking back then? Celia's expression remained indifferent. To her, it was all in the past. Ethan clenched his fists, regret washing over him like a tidal wave. If only he hadn't been so proud back then, if he had just communicated with her directly, if he had found out what the truth was, would Celia have been spared so much suffering? Would they have not wasted so much time? Ethan tried to suppress his emotions, but he couldn't hold back any longer. He pulled her into his arms. Celia stiffened, instinctively trying to push him away. Don't move, Ethan said, patting her back. I just want to comfort the 22-year-old Celia Carter. It was a simple sentence, but for some reason, it made Celia's nose sting. How desperately had the Celia of back then yearned for this embrace. She closed her eyes, trying to swallow her tears, but they overflowed anyway. She pushed Ethan away, turned her head, and wiped the corners of her eyes. After a moment, she choked out, It's all in the past. But the future is still ahead of us, isn't it? Ethan looked at her. If this were 10 years ago, or even 5, I would have been overjoyed to hear you say that. Celia's expression was complicated, but she rejected his embrace. But now, I don't need it anymore. Silence filled the car. No one spoke again until they reached the airport. Ethan's private jet was waiting on the tarmac, ready for takeoff. As soon as she boarded, Celia closed her eyes to rest, treating the man beside her as if he were air. Ethan sat next to her, just watching her quietly. Celia's sleep was restless. She could feel an intense gaze on her. She knew who it was, but she refused to open her eyes. She felt her hand being taken, held firmly in Ethan's. His palm was as dry and warm as it had been years ago, enveloping her hand completely. A moment later, she suddenly felt a wet drop on the back of her hand. Stunned, Celia cracked her eyes open. It was a tear from Ethan. Chapter 29, after they landed, Celia was unusually silent. Ethan thought she was unhappy, but what she was feeling was far more complex than simple displeasure. She had believed that after everything she had been through, her heart had become immune, that nothing could stir a ripple in it. But with a single tear, Ethan had shaken her to the core. She had once cried rivers for this man, sobbing uncontrollably. She knew all too well the bitterness of lovesickness. She had wanted to take revenge on him, to drag him from his pedestal down into the mud, to make him feel everything she had once felt. But that tear that had fallen on her hand seemed to have seeped through her skin and into her very being, making her heart ache with its sorrow. "I had some gowns prepared for you. Do you like them?" Ethan asked softly, carefully observing her expression. He knew she didn't want to be by his side, much less attend this banquet with him, but he truly couldn't let her go. Celia glanced at the bright red cocktail dress and tried it on. A designer from the brand was waiting to make final adjustments, ensuring the dress fit her perfectly. Next came the expensive jewelry laid out beside it. Ethan had prepared more than one gown for her, and like a man with new money, he had paired each with a different set of jewels. This was everything an 18-year-old girl would adore, but to her, it was all rather uninteresting. Ethan felt a pang of disappointment. For the first time, he felt clumsy, unsure of how to please the woman he loved. After the makeup artist had finished her work and styled her hair, Celia emerged from the room, looking radiant. What exactly is this occasion that requires such a grand production? Celia tugged at her dress, feeling a little unaccustomed to it. Given the preparations, she could have walked a red carpet and fit right in. "It's just an auction," Ethan said, taking her hand and gallantly opening the car door for her. It wasn't until she got out of the car that Celia realized the so-called auction was being held at the grandest hotel in the capital. The items up for auction were mainly land and asset packages. Many prominent figures in the business world used such grand events as a venue for exchanging industry information and expanding their networks. After years of development, the Blackwood family's business interests had expanded far beyond the pharmaceutical industry, diversifying into various other sectors. Ethan leaned in and whispered in her ear, "A lot of my friends are here tonight. Remember to give me some face." "Am I supposed to play your secretary?" Celia asked, feeling no pressure at all. After all, few people in the capital would recognize her. "Of course not," Ethan murmured back. "At an event like this, bringing your secretary as your date would get you laughed at." Celia's face flushed, unsure if he was teasing her. Ethan guided her hand to the crook of his arm, gesturing for her to link it, and then led her into the banquet hall. The room was a glittering spectacle of bright lights and elegant attire, a world he knew well. Celia played the part of a beautiful accessory perfectly. Well, after all these years, you two finally made it official." A teasing voice sounded beside her. Celia looked over and found the man vaguely familiar. "What's wrong? Don't remember me?" he joked good-naturedly. "I certainly remember you. Back in university, you were always coming to find Ethan." Celia felt a little awkward. After exchanging a few more words, she finally recognized him. Remembering her reckless, youthful days when she shamelessly followed Ethan around like a little tail, she couldn't help but blush. Ethan watched her the whole time. Seeing her faint blush of shyness, his heart softened. He hoped she would remember the good times they had shared. Unfortunately, fate often had other plans. Chapter 30, any event Ethan Blackwood attended inevitably became the center of attention. Celia stayed by his side for a while, noticing that although he appeared cold, he was remarkably adept at social interactions. He was neither overly enthusiastic nor neglectful, making even first-time acquaintances feel at ease. She couldn't help but wonder why such a smooth operator always revealed such a cruel side to her. "What is it?" Ethan handed her a glass of wine and asked softly. Celia shook her head. Just then, someone else came over to chat with him. Noticing her distraction, Ethan suggested she go get some appetizers from the buffet. The person who had approached them observed Ethan's uncharacteristically gentle demeanor and asked, "And this is?" "My girlfriend," Ethan said. "What?" The man looked shocked. "But I thought you and that girl from the Sterling family. It wasn't a good fit. We broke up," Ethan announced, dropping the bombshell nonchalantly, paying no mind to the man's stunned expression. In truth, he was not an impulsive or reckless person. He had meticulously planned every step of his life to get to where he was today, standing out among all the Blackwood heirs to become the family's leading figure. But no one is immune to the pull of emotion. Everyone is swayed by their feelings at times, leading to less than rational decisions. Like right now, he knew perfectly well that this was neither the right time nor the right place to make such an announcement. It would displease the Sterling family, anger his mother, and might even cause the board of directors to question his judgment. But he didn't want to hide it anymore. He didn't want people to look at her with strange eyes. He didn't want their relationship to be misunderstood. Celia was still unaware of his thoughts or the shocking news he had just dropped. She sat in a corner, eating dessert and marveling at the deep roots of the Blackwood family. This was the power of an established dynasty. Prominent figures, men who usually only appeared on television, were humble and polite when facing Ethan Blackwood. For the first time, she wondered if her revenge plan could ever truly work against him. Even if it did, could she really bring him down? "Celia Carter, I warned you not to pester my son again." An angry, suppressed female voice came from behind her. Celia turned to see Victoria Blackwood standing there. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her handbag, clearly using all her strength to contain her fury. "I haven't been pestering him," Celia said, shaking her head and looking past Victoria. Ethan looked tense. The moment he saw his mother, he excused himself from the person he was talking to and rushed to Celia's side in a few quick strides. Seeing her son, Victoria's anger flared even hotter. "What's wrong with Jenny? Why do you have to be with this vixen?" Not wanting to make a public scene, Victoria kept her voice low. Even so, countless eyes were now fixed on them. Ethan put a protective arm around Celia's waist, his stance firm and unwavering, even in front of his mother. "Mom, who I want to be with is my own business." "Your own business?" Victoria grew even angrier. "Your marriage is a major affair for the Blackwood family, not child's play. I don't care who you fool around with, but you will win Jenny back." "That's impossible," Ethan flatly refused. "I've already told her it's over. As for the Sterlings, I haven't even settled my score with them yet." Victoria's face turned pale, then red. She looked dreadful. Fortunately, she still had some regard for her status and refrained from screaming insults at Celia. However, Celia couldn't hold back any longer. She set her wine glass aside, shrugged off Ethan's hand, and smiled at Victoria. "Actually, there's no need to be so worked up. I'm just here to attend a banquet tonight. I have no other intentions." As she finished speaking, Ethan's expression instantly darkened. Chapter 31, "What do you mean?" Victoria glared at her. "What, you think just because my son likes you, you can throw your weight around here?" The implication was clear. As Ethan's mother, she had the final say in his marriage. "No, that's not what I mean," Celia smiled. "I'm simply expressing my displeasure at you calling me a vixen." "Was I wrong?" Victoria shot back. "You're a persistent pest. You came to our house looking for him over a decade ago, and I told you to get lost. I warned you again just a few days ago not to push your luck." "Mom, you went to see her? When was this?" Ethan asked. But in this battle of wills between two women, a man's voice was utterly useless. No one paid him any mind. "I'm not the one pestering him," Celia's lips curved into a cool smile. "I came back to this country purely for business. If he hadn't sought me out himself, I wouldn't have even spoken a word to him." "That's enough," Ethan warned in a low voice. "Why shouldn't I say it?" Celia took a step forward, completely ignoring Ethan. "Mrs. Blackwood, instead of warning others, you should try managing your own son. After all, I'm just a helpless woman who is very distressed by all this harassment and pestering." As she spoke, Celia didn't even glance at Ethan. She knew he would be hurting. With his immense pride and ego, being described with such words by a woman would undoubtedly infuriate him to his core. But she had to say it. Even if her own heart ached so much she could cry, she refused to let Victoria humiliate her like this. From the day she left Jiangcheng 5 years ago, she had sworn to give them a taste of their own medicine. "Is this the woman you've chosen?" Victoria demanded of Ethan. "Did I raise you all these years just to see you grovel before this low-class trash?" Ethan clenched his fists, forcing the words through his teeth. "And whose fault is that but yours?" Victoria staggered back a step, clutching her chest in disbelief. "How can you speak to me like that? I'm your mother." Ethan took a deep breath and pulled Celia toward the exit. The Bentley was parked outside, the driver dozing inside. Celia stumbled along in her high heels, hampered by the narrow hem of her gown, and fell into his arms just as they reached the car. The car door was thrown open, and Celia was pushed inside, tumbling onto the back seat. She could feel Ethan's rage, but she had no regrets. Over the years, she had suffered so much because of him and his mother. If her words could cause them even a flicker of discomfort, it was all worth it. The partition between the back seat and the driver's cabin was raised. Ethan got in. The door closed, sealing them in a private space. Ethan ripped off his suit jacket, threw it on the floor, and loosened his perfectly knotted tie. The refined, handsome gentleman vanished, replaced by the beast he had kept hidden inside, savage and full of aggression. Celia knew this was his true self. Arrogant, ruthless, and predatory. The gentle, chivalrous man of the past few days had been nothing but a facade. "Celia Carter, does humiliating me like that make you happy?" His dark voice echoed in the car, making Celia flinch for a moment. Chapter 32, You Call That Humiliation? Celia propped herself up, slowly retreating into a corner as if facing a beast on the verge of attack. "Then the humiliation your mother subjects me to must be a daily special. I will handle my mother. I will make her apologize to you." Ethan leaned over her, his knee pinning her waist as he gripped her chin, looking down at her imperiously. "But that is no excuse for you to humiliate me." Seeing his entitled expression, the fury in Celia's heart finally erupted. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. "I humiliated you? You think this is humiliation? Do you have any idea what I've been through?" Before she could finish, Ethan silenced her with his lips. The moment their warm, soft lips met, she felt a dizzying, intoxicating rush. But a second later, clarity returned, and she bit down hard. She would not let anyone who bullied her get away with it. The taste of blood filled their mouths, but Ethan was too strong. He held her chin, forcing her to submit. His hand found the zipper on her back and tore her dress open. The heavy gown was pushed up from under her, bunching thickly around her waist, trapping her, making it impossible to move. He bent down, his lips trailing across her chest. As she stared in disbelief, he buried his head and kissed her there. All resistance in that moment was surrendered. Celia squeezed her legs together, trembling. For the first time, she felt how agile his tongue could be, sending shivers through her very soul, making her scream for release. "Bastard, is force all you know?" she gasped, her fingers scratching weakly at the sofa, unable to find purchase. Ethan looked up, a cruel taunt in his voice. "Is it?" Celia caught his gaze and her heart trembled. She clamped a hand over her mouth, terrified of letting even the slightest sound escape. The next second, her hips were lifted, and she was impaled as if she were a sacrifice. The car moved through the night, a Bach symphony masking the sounds from the back seat. When they reached their destination, the driver fled as if for his life, but the symphony in the back did not stop. Celia was a wreck. She could only cling helplessly to the man's neck, like a flower ravaged by a storm, her body swaying ever more alluringly under the onslaught. Ethan tore her gown to shreds. The dress, worth hundreds of thousands, was now nothing but a rag beneath her. "How does that feel?" His lips were at her neck, his voice a low whisper in her ear, like a lover's murmur. Celia arched her neck, feeling as if she could hardly bear the intensity. She managed to gather a sliver of strength, wanting to escape, but she had nowhere to run. Her mind wanted to refuse, but her body was sinking deeper into a state of blissful abandon. Only her words remained defiant. "It's nothing special," she finally managed to catch her breath. "Mr. Blackwood, age is catching up to you. You're clearly not what you used to be." Ethan's face darkened, and his grip on her waist tightened. For the rest of the time, he didn't give her another chance to speak. as if determined to make up for all their lost years in a single night. Celia stared at the constantly shaking roof of the car, feeling like a fish on a cutting board with no escape. A part of her regretted her defiant words for provoking him, but it was too late for regrets now. She could only wrap her arms tightly around his lean waist, lost in wave after wave of sensation, drifting in and out of consciousness, surrendering and resisting in a dizzying cycle. Chapter 33. The next morning, Celia opened her eyes, her entire body aching. She felt as if she had been run over by a truck sore all over, with a profound sense of emptiness. She had no idea how she had gotten out of the car or into this bed. Celia struggled to sit up and instinctively touched the other side of the bed. It was still slightly warm, he must have just left. Her heart felt hollow. Just then, Ethan pushed the door open, carrying a tray. On it was a simple Western breakfast: bacon, toast, a fried egg, and black coffee. The smell of food made her realize she was starving, her stomach burning with hunger. She picked up the heavy brass alarm clock on the nightstand. It was 3 p.m. That beast, Ethan. How late had he tormented her last night? Hungry? Ethan placed the breakfast on the nightstand, then took a pillow and tucked it behind Celia's back. As he moved, the blanket slipped, revealing her pale shoulder dotted with bite marks. Her chest was covered in love bites, a testament to the intensity of the previous night. Ethan's eyes darkened for a moment before he suppressed the thought. Celia's back ached, and she leaned against the soft pillow, facing the handsome man. He looked concerned, even reaching under the covers to gently rub her lower back with exceptional thoughtfulness. For a moment, she felt dazed. If time could rewind to when she was 20, to be cared for so tenderly by her boyfriend after a night of passion, it would have been a blissful experience. But times had changed. Yet, after all these years, she could still feel a trace of that long-ago yearning. Celia lifted her hand. "Get me something to wear." Her expensive gown from last night was now in tatters, and she had no idea where her jewelry had gone. Ethan took a large T-shirt from the closet. "Wear this for now. I'll have some clothes sent over later." This was his place. There were no women's clothes here. Celia didn't complain. She put on the shirt and went to the bathroom to freshen up. Her legs were weak, and there was a stinging pain when she walked, which was very uncomfortable. By the time she finished breakfast, the clothes Ethan had ordered had arrived. She changed in the walk-in closet and then sat on the living room sofa, calling her assistant to pick her up. "Where are you going?" Ethan sat down beside her. "I'll have someone drive you." He seemed unusually gentle now, like a well-fed wolf that had lost its aggression, even capable of a clumsy wag of its tail. Celia gave him a surprised look. "Home, of course." She looked at Ethan and suddenly smiled. "Mr. Blackwood, you don't actually think that after last night we're lovers, do you?" Ethan said nothing, just watched her with a restrained expression. "We're both adults. It was a consensual encounter, nothing more." She stood up and patted his cheek playfully. "Last night is over, just let it go like the wind." "What if I say I can't forget?" Ethan grabbed her hand, squeezing slightly. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, like a predator eyeing its prey, full of possessiveness. Celia pulled her hand away. "That's fine too, you can savor the memory." "Am I the only one who's going to savor it?" His hand rested on her waist, slowly moving downward. "Last night you didn't seem entirely unaffected." Chapter 34. I'm not dead. With Mr. Blackwood putting in so much effort, how could I not feel anything? Celia caught his hand, stopping its descent. "I had my fill last night. There's no need for another helping today." Ethan asked, "Since my performance was satisfactory, will there be a next time?" "Some desserts are best enjoyed occasionally. If you make them your main course, you'll get indigestion." Celia took 2 steps back and headed for the door. Back at her apartment, Celia received a new message. "Dr. Blackwood Corp has paused all contact with us." She stared at the short line of text, thinking back to the previous night, and felt a pang of softness in her heart. Ethan didn't know she was Dr. X in his eyes. He held all the cards. If he wanted to, he could make it impossible for her to answer to her headquarters. But even so, he hadn't actually made a move against her. Celia sat on the sofa for a long time before finally pulling a pack of Marlboros from a drawer. She rarely smoked, only when her mind was in turmoil and she couldn't sort through her thoughts. A single cigarette helped her stay clear-headed. The smoke swirled in her nostrils, but the minty flavor couldn't wash away the sorrow in her heart. Finally, she made up her mind and dialed a number. "It's me. Have them release the press statement. Say that EMT intends to partner with Sterling Pharma to co-develop X10923. She hung up and stubbed out the cigarette. The response was swift. The press release had been prepared in advance. Within half a day, the headlines of every major pharmaceutical news site were about the partnership between EMT and Sterling. Although the body of the article mentioned the word intends, no one paid attention to it in the face of the bold, red headlines. Celia's phone rang nonstop, but she didn't answer a single call. It wasn't until the next morning that Ethan appeared at her door, knocking insistently. At first, Celia ignored him, but when her neighbors came out, threatening to call the police, she had no choice but to open the door, her expression sour. "I told you, dessert is fine occasionally. If you have it as a main course, you'll get sick of it." Her barbed words finally ignited Ethan's fury. He pushed his way inside, slammed the door shut, and demanded, "What's this about a partnership with Sterling?" When he saw the news yesterday afternoon, he had dismissed it as media gossip. But by evening, even the team that had been in contact with Dr. X had asked his secretary for instructions on whether to continue the collaboration. Only then did he realize Celia was serious. Just the night before, he had paraded her around at the auction. News of his broken engagement with Genevieve Sterling had probably spread throughout the capital's entire social circle. And now today, his ex-fiancée and his current girlfriend had joined forces to slap him resoundingly across the face. "I told you before that I was interested in partnering with Sterling. They meet our criteria for a collaborator," Celia said coolly, her tone all business, a stark contrast to the previous night. "Celia Carter, do you really think there's nothing I can do to you?" Ethan's expression was menacing. "The Blackwood family is vast and powerful. Surely you don't need to concern yourself with such a small project, right?" Celia said. "Do you really not understand why I'm so determined to get this project?" Ethan stared at her, as if trying to see into her soul. Celia turned her head, avoiding his gaze. "Why?" An answer slowly surfaced in her mind. He wanted to make up for the regrets of the past. Ethan walked to the door. "I will get this project my way, but I promise you, when that day comes, if you want to join, you will always be welcome." The next morning, Celia received new information. Chapter 35, at 8 o'clock that evening, Celia Carter arrived at the Dome restaurant in the capital right on time. At the other end of a long table, Ethan Blackwood seemed to have been waiting for some time. When he saw her, he didn't look as surprised as she had expected. "You're Dr. X?" Ethan asked, his expression complex. He stood up, pulled out a chair for her at the opposite end of the table, and she sat down. Celia tilted her head slightly. "I thought you'd be more shocked. If you hadn't asked to meet me at the Dome restaurant, I probably would have been." Ethan signaled a waiter, who brought out the appetizers and poured them both glasses of excellent wine. Celia swirled the red wine in her glass. "You guess just because I chose this restaurant? I did some digging as well, but I could never be certain." Ethan looked at her and suddenly asked, "Do you remember that night?" He didn't specify which night, but no more words were needed. Celia knew what he meant. It was many, many years ago, the night she gave herself to him. That night, he had whispered in her ear that he would book the entire Dome restaurant so the stars in the sky could bear witness to their love. The vows and promises were still vivid in her memory, but in the blink of an eye, everything had changed. Celia shook her head. "I've forgotten everything." Ethan lowered his head, a fleeting look of sorrow crossing his face before he quickly hid it. "Let's talk about X10923. Ethan changed the subject. "What makes you so sure I'm willing to talk?" Celia poked at the salad in her bowl, having little appetite. "If you had no intention of talking, you wouldn't have shown up here as Dr. X. You could have just ignored me," Ethan said. "Yes, you're right," Celia admitted, finally acknowledging her true purpose. All her previous rejections, including the news release about partnering with Sterling Pharma, had been a strategy to raise her value and negotiate better terms with Ethan. After all, this was an elaborate game she had set up. How could it proceed if Ethan didn't play his part? "You can state your terms," Ethan said, steepling his fingers, his customary posture at the negotiating table. Calm and guarded. "You will provide full funding for subsequent development, but I will retain 51 of the shares," Celia stated. All rights regarding personnel appointments and development patents will belong entirely to me. These were incredibly harsh terms, tantamount to him paying for her to build her own success. Even with Ethan's significant influence on the board, such conditions would never be approved. It violated the core principles of business partnership. In simple terms, it was a handout. After hearing her out, Ethan didn't hesitate for long. "All right," he said. Hearing his answer, Celia for a moment thought she had misheard. She had made the outrageous demand as a standard negotiating tactic start high, then bargain down. She had been waiting for him to counter, but instead, he simply said, "All right." This complete capitulation made her feel as though he would give her anything she asked for. Years ago, he had indeed promised her, "Whatever you want, as long as you want it and I have it." Celia was taken aback. "Are you sure you've thought this through? Are you certain?" "What? I'm willing to give it, but you're afraid to take it." Ethan's lips curved into a slight smile. "However, I do have a suggestion." "What is it?" Celia asked. "Since you are Dr. X, why not take your team and leave? Wouldn't it be better to start your own company?" Ethan dangled the bait. "I will back this project 100%. You won't have to worry about funding. But if this contract is signed under your company's name, the bulk of the profits will go to them." "Is that really what you want?" Chapter 36. Celia had to admit Ethan was a master of business negotiations. If she didn't have other motives, if she were just a researcher leading a team, she would have been genuinely tempted by his offer. Compared to working for a pharmaceutical company, being your own boss, controlling your own funds and R&D progress would certainly maximize profits. And for Blackwood Corporation, the biggest gain would be poaching one of New China Group's core research teams. Even if it meant a greater initial investment, as long as they controlled the sales channels, they would eventually recoup their costs. Celia had to admire his negotiating skills. In just a few seconds, he had thought through the situation so thoroughly and was even trying to turn a competitor's lead researcher. Unfortunately, her purpose in returning to the country was never about making money. Celia shook her head, declining his offer. "Think about it," Ethan said, calm and confident, as if he knew he had her cornered. "I never make a losing deal except when it comes to you." Celia didn't budge. Soon, a preliminary cooperation agreement between EMT and Blackwood was drafted. As Celia was reviewing the contract, she suddenly received a message from the European headquarters. "Did you know that Blackwood Corporation is in talks with headquarters to buy out the EMT subsidiary directly?" Celia was stunned. She immediately made an international call. "When did this happen? Why was I kept completely in the dark?" Her voice was an octave higher, her shock palpable. "I just found out myself." The man on the other end of the line was very calm. "Celia, calm down. Think about where things went wrong." Celia was silent for a long moment. Their original plan was to use X10923 as a front to secure a substantial amount of funding from Blackwood, then take the research team and leave headquarters. But she had never expected Ethan to be so persistent. After learning that she was Dr. X, he had still tried to bypass her and negotiate directly with headquarters. From headquarters' perspective, selling EMT for a good price would certainly be an attractive option. After all, EMT was little more than a convincing shell company. If Ethan deals directly with headquarters, the money will never reach us, let alone fund our subsequent plans. The voice on the phone sounded almost seductive. "Celia, this is an outcome neither of us wants to see. Think about what we should do." "Give me some time to think," Celia said, a sense of panic rising within her. She felt like events were spinning out of her control. "Don't worry, I'm flying back now. We'll talk in person." Celia agreed and hung up. She realized she had oversimplified things, had underestimated Ethan. The next day, she was at home when she tried calling Ethan, but the line was constantly busy. Just then, she received a text message from him asking her to pick him up at the airport. Without a second thought, Celia rushed out. The plane landed. Julian Linden had traveled light, without even an assistant, back to Jiangcheng. Celia went to meet him. "How did you get here so fast? I thought you'd be delayed for a few days." "I was worried about you," Julian said, patting her on the head just as he had years ago. At that moment, a voice filled with suppressed anger came from behind them. "Celia Carter," she turned to see Ethan Blackwood striding toward them. Chapter 37. Celia was yanked aside by a powerful force. It was the first time she had ever seen Ethan so consumed by rage. "You're still in contact with him?" Ethan demanded. Celia had no idea why he was suddenly acting so insane. Beside her, Julian Linden extended a hand. "Old classmate, long time no see." Ethan shot him a cold look, making no move to shake his hand. The entanglement between the three of them had begun many, many years ago. A cliched campus love triangle, yet it had been their reality. Why had Ethan so easily believed the photos Isabel Vance had shown him? Because the people in the photos were Celia and Julian. And now, years later, Ethan saw them together again, with the same intimate gesture. Worse still, just yesterday, he had learned something that had unleashed a hurricane in his heart. Julian Linden was a shareholder in New China Group, the parent company of EMT, where Celia currently worked. All these years, he had been unable to find Celia, and it was all thanks to Julian. "This is why you refuse to work with me, isn't it?" Ethan's voice was soft, yet laced with threat. "Even when I offered you the most generous terms, even when I was willing to lose money just to fund you, you would rather have nothing than leave New China Group. It's because of him, isn't it?" Celia had never expected to run into Ethan here. She opened her mouth, but her mind was a complete blank. It wasn't what Ethan thought, but the truth was far more sordid. She looked at Ethan's angry, grief-stricken face. She had thought she would be thrilled to see him this way. But in reality, she felt no pleasure at all, only a heavy tightness in her chest, a suffocating pain. Seeing her silence, Ethan let out a cold laugh. "Do you think I'll let you have your way?" Celia didn't know what he was planning, but a sense of unease washed over her. 3 days later, Celia received the latest news from headquarters. EMT was about to be sold as a package deal to Blackwood Corporation. At the same time, headquarters had confirmed the partner for the Starlight project. It was also Blackwood Corporation. The moment she received the news, Celia felt a chill run through her, as if she had been plunged into an icy abyss. She hadn't expected Ethan to move so quickly. In just 3 days, he had arranged everything. When she heard who the partner for the Starlight project was, she was utterly shocked, speechless for a long time. According to her original plan with Julian, they were to use X10923 as a front to acquire a large amount of liquid capital. They would then find a way to divert the funds and separate the real research team, the one behind the Starlight project, from the parent company, to establish a company they truly controlled. In reality, only the core research of the Starlight project had the potential to be the miracle drug that could slow the progression of brain tumors. Even within the parent company, very few people knew the true progress of this top-secret, trump card project, which was why she had dared to exploit this information gap. And now, just as her plan was getting started, Ethan had seen through it all. He had acquired EMT for a very low price and, at the same time, had become a partner in the Starlight project. Celia called Julian. How could the partner for the Starlight project be decided so quickly? "I knew nothing about this." Julian was silent for a moment before replying. "Celia, I just found out myself. My brother made the final decision." And what?" Celia pressed. She already had a bad feeling. "And from the moment you became the CEO of EMT, the Starlight project no longer has anything to do with you." Chapter 38, "So you're kicking me to the curb now that I've served my purpose?" Celia asked coldly. "No, it's just a strategic optimization of team members," Julian said urgently. "Celia, don't get too upset. The company can assign you to other projects. Besides, you can keep your profit-sharing shares in the Starlight project. You'll get every penny you're owed." Celia hung up the phone. It was utterly laughable. The Starlight project was a research initiative she had started 3 years ago. After 3 years of hard work, just as they were about to see results, she was being pushed out. And this was a move she had initiated herself, all because she couldn't let go of the past, because she wanted revenge on Ethan Blackwood. What was even more laughable was that Ethan had defeated her so completely in just a few days. The company she was CEO of had been bought by him. He could fire her at any moment. The project she had poured her heart and soul into now had him as a partner, and headquarters had even excluded her from it. Without a word, Celia went back inside and packed her things. She was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of shock and grief. Her 5 years of hard work felt like the tide. At high tide, she thought she had everything, but when the tide receded, it left behind nothing but wreckage. Her phone rang incessantly, but she had no desire to answer. It wasn't until there was an urgent knocking at the door that she numbly walked over and opened it. Ethan Blackwood stood outside, slightly out of breath, as if he had run here from somewhere. He was holding a file. "Do you want to read this standing in the doorway, or should we go inside?" Celia didn't take the file, her face a blank mask as she tried to shut the door. Ethan blocked it with his hand. "Your Starlight Project, don't you want to continue it?" The mention of the Starlight Project was the final blow. Celia broke. It was the fruit of her painstaking research, and now it was being stolen from her. How could she accept that? For years, countless sleepless nights, it was the memory of her father's death that had driven her to this point. The thing she held as precious as her own life was being snatched away by him as casually as picking up a stray dog on the street. "Ethan Blackwood, you've taken everything from me, and now you're taking the Starlight Project too." Celia broke down, her eyes burning with tears. It turned out that no matter how much time had passed, in his presence, she was still that weak, fragile little girl. She was powerless against the hurt he could inflict. "I didn't take it. I wanted to give it to you," Ethan said, his heart aching as he watched her curl up on the floor, sobbing her heart out. Before doing this, he had hesitated. But after much thought, he had gone through with it. As soon as he got the signed contract for the Starlight Project, he had rushed back to Jiangcheng, day and night, afraid that she would do something impulsive in her grief. "I invested in the Starlight Project personally and acquired a 51% stake," Ethan said, helping her to her feet. "I know you have your own research direction, but in the Starlight Project, your ideas were often constrained by funding and costs. Now that I've bought into it, I'm giving you the 51% stake. I will also provide all future funding." Celia stared at him, stunned, tears still clinging to her eyelashes. "It's true, it didn't take much effort for me to figure out your plan," he said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. "Celia, the scheming and backstabbing of the business world don't suit you. You belong in a lab, doing what you love." Chapter 39. Celia did not accept the share transfer agreement. Her mind was in turmoil. With EMT sold, she had no reason to go to the office anymore, so she simply packed a bag and left the country. She once thought foreign lands were far away, so far that she and Ethan hadn't seen each other for 7 years. But now that she had taken the step, she realized the world wasn't that big. Making a home wherever she went wasn't so scary, especially since she no longer had a home to begin with. Ethan had wanted to follow her, but she sent him away. He resorted to texting her 3 times a day, at mealtimes. She would occasionally reply with a few words to let him know she hadn't vanished, but mostly, she remained silent. Living alone in a small apartment abroad, she experienced a blank slate in her life for the first time. She couldn't help but reflect on what she had done wrong, what she had missed over the years, to end up like this. Her family was gone, and she had nothing. The more she reflected, the more she realized that many of her problems stemmed from a lack of honesty. She hadn't been honest, and Ethan had been too proud. In their youthful arrogance, they had lost more than a decade, right up until now. Could a shattered mirror, even when glued back together, ever be free of its cracks? Was it even worth trying to mend? Celia didn't know. One morning, she received an email from Manchester. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the content made it impossible for her to look away. "Regarding your father, I believe I can offer you an explanation. If you are willing, please meet me at the following address on Wednesday afternoon." At first, Celia wanted to ignore it. Her father had been dead for many years. What more was there to say? But the matter took root in her mind, leaving her tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Late that night, she had someone look up the sender's information. It turned out to be Professor Shaw's daughter, who was now a professor at the University of Manchester. After much hesitation, she decided to go to the address provided. It was a gray, overcast day. The Manchester wind, cold and unfamiliar, whipped her hair into a mess. She arrived at a detached house with a garden. Crossing the lawn, she rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered. "You must be Miss Carter. Please come in and have a seat." Celia entered and sat on the sofa. A cup of black tea was placed beside her. A moment later, a woman in a velvet skirt came rushing down the stairs in slippers. Her features were distinctly mixed race, and she spoke perfect Mandarin. "Hello, I'm Sylvia Shaw." "Hello," Celia stood up and shook her hand. "I'm Celia Carter." "I know, I've seen your picture on Ethan's phone, Sylvia smiled at her. After all these years, you still look much the same. Celia pursed her lips. In your email, you said you wanted to explain something about my father. I don't understand what that has to do with you. My father's condition? It doesn't have much to do with me, but it has everything to do with my father. Sylvia gestured for her to follow. Celia followed her to a corner of the house, to a spacious sunroom. Unfortunately, there was rarely any sun in England. An old man with white hair and a white beard sat in a wheelchair, his eyes closed. Celia had been abroad for many years and had met many brilliant neurosurgeons, but she had always avoided learning anything about Professor Shaw. Today was the first time she had seen him. Professor Shaw was so old now. Chapter 40, I heard about your current situation from Ethan, Sylvia said, slowly approaching the old man. The truth is, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's several years ago. His health no longer permits him to perform surgery. My father has been a proud man his entire life and didn't want his condition to be made public, so very few people know. Sylvia's voice was soft, but it was enough to wake the old man. Professor Shaw opened his eyes, looked at them, and then beckoned to Celia. Celia walked over and heard him say, Sylvia, tell Ethan not to be too sad. The old man's Alzheimer's was severe. He had mistaken Celia for his own daughter, and he held her hand, rambling on. His words were mumbled and disjointed, but Celia managed to pick out a few key phrases that made her eyes burn. Sylvia slowly came closer. 5 years ago, Ethan came to see my father. He asked if he could fly to Jiangcheng for a surgery. There was a patient with a very complex case, and he wasn't confident he could handle it. The patient's condition also meant they couldn't endure a long journey, so the surgery had to be done in Jiangcheng. My father refused him at first. Ethan then came to our house late at night, and they ended up having a huge argument upstairs, Sylvia said. That was the first time I had ever seen Ethan so agitated. He was like a different person. Later, I heard he contacted everyone in his network, trying to find someone to perform the surgery in Jiangcheng. Sylvia's voice was quiet. Someone did agree, a friend of my father's, also very famous in the field. But he was in South Africa at the time, operating on another patient, and couldn't make it in time. Sometime after that, Ethan came to our door again to inform us that the patient had passed away, Sylvia sighed. He was so dejected. I was afraid he and my father would have a falling out, so I told him about my father's illness. Celia sank to the floor, her voice choked with sobs. He never told me any of this. All she remembered was Ethan using the situation to manipulate her, toying with her, and then refusing to help. In the end, her father, provoked by Quentin Pierce and unwilling to be a burden, had taken his own life. From that day on, she was homeless. Celia, I wasn't originally going to tell you any of this, Sylvia said, leaning against the doorway, her tone heavy. You're a doctor too. You should understand that sometimes life and death are fated. You can't blame the doctor. Celia was silent, tears streaming down her face. After you went abroad, he looked for you for a long time. Every time he came to visit my father, he seemed so down. Sylvia walked over and picked up the thin blanket that had slipped from Professor Shaw's lap. I'm telling you this today because I want to clear up this misunderstanding. Ethan truly did his best for your father. Celia cried for a long time before she finally calmed down. Sylvia handed her a towel to wipe her tears. Celia sniffled and looked up at her, her eyes still red. Thank you for telling me this. Ethan is an old friend of mine. Sylvia patted her shoulder. I don't know much about what happened between you two, but I do know that he has always kept you in his heart. Even during his years studying abroad, he never forgot you. Life is short, only 100 years. Think about how much time you two have already wasted. Why continue to torture each other over these things? Sylvia smiled at her. Stop crying, go find him, he's been waiting for you. Chapter 41. Celia Carter returned to her home country. She took no luggage, only her passport, flying from Manchester to Copenhagen and then back to the capital. The moment she landed, she turned on her phone and was flooded with notifications. Hundreds of missed calls, all from the same number, from the same person. She had been on a plane for nearly 12 hours without replying to his messages, and Ethan had clearly panicked. Countless calls, countless texts. The last message had been sent 5 minutes ago. Celia, are you back in the country? Celia breathed a small sigh of relief. He must have found out from Sylvia that she had been in Manchester. His call came through again and she quickly answered. The line connected, but neither of them spoke. After a long silence, Ethan finally asked, "Where are you?" Celia looked around. "I'm at the capital airport. Why did you come back without telling me?" Ethan cleared his throat, stubbing out the cigarette in his hand. "I'll come get you." The traffic in the capital was as congested as ever. It was nearly an hour later when Celia finally saw the familiar Bentley in the parking garage. The moment she saw Ethan, she felt a pang of self-consciousness. She had rushed back in such a hurry that she had brought almost nothing with her, not even makeup. After a 24-hour journey of flights and layovers, she was a complete mess. But Ethan didn't seem to notice any of that. He got out of the car, strode toward her, and pulled her into his arms. It was late autumn, and the capital was already cold, the air filled with a deep chill. But his embrace was warm, and it made her want to cry. "I couldn't reach you for 24 hours. Ethan held her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head as if he wanted to absorb her into himself. "I thought you had left again. In my entire life, no person, no thing, has ever made me panic like you do." His voice was filled with sorrow, helplessness, and the profound relief of having found something he had lost. "I'm sorry, I should have told you first." Celia clutched his coat, her voice already choked with emotion as she spoke. "I'm so sorry." Celia sniffled, not wanting to cry in public. "Let's get in the car, this is so embarrassing." Ethan led her to the car. The moment the door closed, Celia pulled him toward her and kissed him. The fiery heat, the intimate contact, seemed to be the only way to purge the regret and bitterness from her heart. They kissed for a long time, until they were breathless and finally broke apart. "Why didn't you tell me?" Celia lightly punched his chest. "You went and begged Professor Shaw to operate on my dad. Why didn't you say anything?" "I'm sorry." Ethan lowered his head, appearing unusually vulnerable before the woman he loved. "I still couldn't save him." Even after so many years, the regret from that time still echoed in his heart. Walter Carter's death was like a chasm between him and Celia. He didn't know how to explain it. No explanation could bring a life back. "If I had gone abroad to get him myself, if I had been just a little quicker, maybe." "It's not your fault." Celia covered his mouth with her hand, shaking her head. "I was only ever angry that you refused to help. I just always felt like you were supposed to help me. I should have." Ethan took her hand and kissed it. "I promised you that I would always be by your side, no matter what. I broke that promise for many years. It was my fault." Inside the car, they apologized to each other, as if trying to pour out a lifetime of missed chances, wasted years, and all their bitterness and regret. It wasn't until the car reached its destination and they walked through the door, still wrapped in an embrace, that they realized another storm was waiting for them. Chapter 42, In Broad Daylight, How Shameless. Victoria Blackwood sat on the sofa, glaring at them. Celia fell silent, her face flushing crimson as she hid behind Ethan. Ethan shielded her, showing no intention of backing down, even in front of his own mother. "I'm in my own home, kissing my own woman. What's so shameless about that?" he said, leading Celia inside, his expression open and unapologetic. "I will never allow her to marry into this family," Victoria said, her face a mask of rejection, her disgust for Celia palpable. "Mom, I've wanted to say this for many years, but I never had the chance," Ethan said, walking over to his mother. Victoria looked up at him, at his resolute jawline and broad shoulders. Many years had passed. The Ethan before her was no longer the boy in his early 20s, but a truly strong, steady, and reliable man. "Whether you accept Celia or not, I have decided to be with her." Ethan's voice was firm and clear. "Mom, there is no vixen and there was no seduction. I just love her. If time could have pulled us apart, we would have broken up years ago. Why wait until now?" Ethan knelt down, looking directly at Victoria. "Mom, I'm not a child anymore. I know what kind of life I want." "The life you want?" Victoria pointed at Celia. "What can she give you? She can give you nothing. Is this the life you want?" "Mom, everything I want I will get for myself," Ethan said, placing his hands on her shoulders, his deep eyes fixed on her. "You know how hard I've worked to get to where I am. If, after all this, I still needed to rely on an arranged marriage, to use love as a transaction to get the life I want, wouldn't that make me pathetic?" Without waiting for Victoria's reaction, he turned and led Celia upstairs. Celia followed him, glancing back at Victoria one last time. It was the first time she had ever seen this proud, arrogant woman look so defeated. The woman who had ordered security to throw her out of the villa all those years ago could no longer hurt her. Once the bedroom door was closed, Celia wrapped her arms around his neck. "That was really cool back there," Celia said, standing on her toes to kiss his lips. "It would have been even cooler if you'd said it back then." "It's not too late now," Ethan breathed heavily, lifting her by the hips and carrying her toward the bed. "No, it's not too late." This time, their lovemaking was more tender and lingering than any they had experienced before. She was pushed forward by his thrusts until her head was about to hit the headboard, but he protected her with his hand. A trail of soft, lingering kisses moved from her lips downward, as if he were worshipping every inch of her body. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the sublime pleasure he gave her. She opened them and saw her lover's handsome face. Everything felt so natural, so right. "Do you remember?" Ethan whispered in her ear. "I wanted to book the entire Dome restaurant for our wedding, so all the stars in the sky could bear witness to our love." In a daze, she felt as if everything that had happened over the years was just a dream, as if none of it had been real, and they were back on the night of Ethan's graduation. She had opened herself to him completely, entrusting him with everything: her body, her love, her soul, all burning with the desire for their embrace. "I remember," she whispered, lying on his chest, listening to the steady, vibrant thumping of her lover's heart. "So what's your answer?" he asked. "Okay." Chapter 43, the late autumn sun warmed her face as Celia Carter awoke from a deep sleep. She opened her eyes and, through the large French windows, saw the European-style man-made lake nearby. Ethan, bare-chested, was sitting on the sofa by the window, drinking coffee. Clutching the blanket, she felt a sense of peace that came from deep within her heart. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan turned his head and looked at her quietly. An unspoken, profound connection flowed between them. Celia sat up and opened her arms to him. Ethan got up, sat on the edge of the bed, and embraced her. This embrace held no impatient desire, no urgent possessiveness. Instead, it was an affirmation of belonging, the feeling of a weary traveler who had finally found their home on a long and winding road. "Ethan, I want to go visit my father's grave," Celia said softly. "Okay." 3 p.m., Jiangcheng Public Cemetery. Celia had been rushed when handling the funeral arrangements back then, but thankfully, her father had already purchased a burial plot for himself before he passed away, right next to his wife. All the years Celia was abroad, she had never visited. She hadn't dared to face it. Her father's death was a nightmare she couldn't escape, a moment when she had lost everything. Only now, with everything settled, did she finally have the courage to confront it. Wearing a black overcoat and holding a bouquet of flowers, Celia walked past rows of tombstones until she reached her father's. She had expected the gravestone to be stained after so many years of neglect, but it was perfectly clean. Even the inscription had not faded in the slightest. She looked at Ethan. "You've been coming here all these years." Ethan nodded silently. He hadn't spent much time with Walter Carter, but whenever he thought of Celia, he would come and sit by the grave. He never believed in ghosts or spirits, but during those years when she had vanished without a trace, he had even found himself silently praying, hoping that her father's spirit would watch over Celia, keep her safe, and bring her back to him soon. Celia knelt down and placed the bouquet in front of the grave. She gently touched the photograph on the headstone. It was from before her father had been ravaged by illness. He was a strong, cheerful man with a bright, toothy smile. "Dad, I'm back to see you," she spoke softly, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm sorry I didn't come back to see you for so many years." Celia sniffled and continued, "I never knew how to face all of this, so I used hatred to numb myself. Looking back now, if I had just told you sooner, if I had explained everything, maybe you wouldn't have taken your own life. Dad, I'm so sorry." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, patting her back gently. "I know it's useless to say this now, but I still want to tell you everything." Celia wiped her tears. "I know you must still be worried about me, afraid that I'm not doing well. So, I brought Ethan Blackwood with me." As she spoke, she remembered the letter her father had left before he died, and she broke down in tears. Even on his deathbed, his greatest concern had been her future. He was so afraid she wouldn't be okay that he chose to give up his own life rather than be a burden to her. "It's all in the past," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms and comforting her softly. Your father's spirit wouldn't want to see you forever caught up in the past, living in pain. Life's hardships often stem from a single moment of poor judgment. Years ago, Ethan had chosen to believe Isabel Vance's lies and left her to go abroad, and they had lost 12 years. An entire cycle of seasons, from autumn to winter and back again. And because of her own poor judgment, she had chosen to deceive her father, ultimately leading to the outcome she had feared most. From that night so long ago, it seemed as if an invisible hand had nudged her life onto a different course, a path filled with hardship. But thankfully, after so many years, after navigating through countless thorns, she had returned to her starting point. It was as if time had rewound, giving her a second chance. The rest of her life might still hold challenges and obstacles, but as long as she held the hand of the person beside her, as long as she could see the path ahead and the home she was returning to, she would not be afraid of anything. The gravestone behind them and the flowers before it slowly blurred into a soft focus of light and color. Amidst the fallen leaves, the sun shone through the dappled branches, casting specks of light on the path at their feet, paving a smooth road ahead for them.